Good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of Saratoga Biochar Solutions, LLC, I'd like to thank you for joining us today for this public information meeting. This forum is being held in accordance with the requirements from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. All legally required public notices have been made in advance of this forum within the time guidelines required by the DEC. And a recording of this forum will be provided to the New York State DEC along with a record of registered participants and also posted on our project website, which is saratogabiochar.com, and the public participation plan portion of that website is /PPP. This meeting is intended for the benefit of residents and business owners of Hudson Falls, Fort Edward, and Glens Falls that live or operate within a 2-mile radius of the proposed facility location in Moreau, and that are also within what DEC has determined under New York State CLCPA law to be disadvantaged communities and/or environmental justice zones. Of course, it's open to the public too, so all are welcome. But I wanted to point out too, we just received an update from DEC that Fort Edward has been upgraded. It's no longer a disadvantaged community. So for what that's worth, the Climate Justice Working Group voted on Monday on final disadvantaged community criteria, and Fort Edward is no longer considered to be a DAC. So for what it's worth, just FYI on that. And it's important that everyone signs in just so we can keep a record of who's attended. So if you haven't done so, Sue can help. I imagine everybody has, but if you need to, Sue in the back there can help you get signed in. We'd like to thank, I had another note here about we need to manage capacity because the fire code limits us to 300 people in here, but I think we'll be okay. So we'll skip that. Thanks to Bill Nikas and the Sandy Hill Art Center for allowing us to use the facility. And the technology and the Zoom remote participant meeting forum is being administered by Technical Video Incorporated of Albany, New York, and we appreciate their help very much. Rob down on the end here that's facing towards us, and so he can also see the audience on the screen, is a part of the technical video team, and he's our Zoom administrator today. Rob will be randomly selecting folks that wish to speak. Please don't pick on him. He's got a tough job here trying to bounce back and forth between people that are participating remotely versus in the room. I also want to point out the process of unmuting a remote participant is a two-way communication. It requires participation from that remote participant and Rob unmuting them on this end, and sometimes it takes 30 to 60 seconds. So if someone wants to speak remotely, it may take a minute to get them on, so please be patient as we bring them into the meeting because we want to hear from them as well. My name is Raymond Appy. I'm the CEO of Saratoga Biochar Solutions, LLC. Joining me here on my far right, well, not Rob all the way down, but right here is Bryce Meeker, our company president. Lee Wolfecool is our chief operating officer, and on my left is Andrew Millspa, who's our consultant engineer with Sterling Environmental Engineering. We're going to begin the presentation in a moment, and we'll follow that with a question and answer session and an opportunity for public comment, and we'll end this meeting at 5 p.m. Or if it gets very quiet and there's nobody coming in later and there's no more need for it, maybe we can end it early. We'll see how that goes. Before we begin, just establishing some basic ground rules for participation. We'd like to hear from as many folks as possible. I don't think we're going to need a time limit given the number of people here. But we just want to make sure everyone gets a chance. So Rob, again, will randomly select speakers from the live audience or remote participants. And for those folks who dial in and use audio only, Rob will also do his best a couple times during the evening to try to give dial-in only participants a chance to speak, and we'd all be able to hear them and come through the speaker system. Bringing in a dial-in only participant also takes a few extra moments, so if we do that, please be patient. Folks who wish to ask a question or make a statement, please be relatively concise. Again, I think we have plenty of time. We don't really seem to need to have a time limit with this many people here, but recognize there may be others that are waiting, so we want everyone to have a chance to be heard. So just be cognizant of your community members and their concerns as well. Folks who attended and made statements or asked questions in last night's meeting will be asked to wait today until new participants have had a chance to speak first. But obviously, as I said, we're going to have ample time for everybody. Again, this forum is required by New York State DEC for the purpose of allowing the local community members to gather information from us, from Saratoga Biochar Solutions. And we'd like this to be a civilized public forum If a speaker is being profane, belligerent, threatening, or otherwise operating outside the bounds of a civilized public forum, we reserve the right to cut that speaker off. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So the first thing is just review our agenda for today. We'd like to address a little bit of misinformation that has been in the media and cycling around social media, and also address a couple things that came up in last night's meeting here. We're going to also provide a project overview. We're going to discuss the potential impacts of the project and the mitigation measures for those potential impacts. So what are we doing to avoid those kind of impacts? We're going to discuss the status of the Monroe site plan and the New York State DEC permitting process. We're going to discuss Project Benefit and how it aligns with New York State's Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. And we're going to inform you how to access DEC permit application, project information, and project contacts. And then we'll move to the public Q&A or comment period. First off, just a few things to go through. Last night at our forum, we had a couple of topics come up, and I just want to address those. They've come up before. I've seen these concerns or statements made in social media, and they've been made publicly now in a public meeting. One is that the claim was made that the carbon fertilizer that we will be producing, that we hope to produce, is not allowed to be sold in New York State, and that's just not true. It contains phosphorus. There are regulations in New York State relative to the use of phosphorus-based fertilizers for lawn care. It's up to the consumer on following those regulations or not. There's no prohibition of using phosphorus-based fertilizers in agriculture and other purposes. There's no regulations against manufacturing fertilizers with phosphorus in it. Phosphorus is a valuable nutrient and is an important part of many growing applications, and quite frankly, pretty much any store in the state of New York that sells fertilizer products also sells various types of fertilizers with phosphorus in it. So I wanted to clarify that. One of the other things that came up that I've seen repeatedly is this claim that there's going to be all this biosolids coming up from New York City into Monroe, and that's not true. We have one biosolids waste hauler partner, that's Casella Organics, and Casella does not have any contracts with New York City and does not transport biosolids from New York City anywhere. So that's simply not true. The things you see on the screen here, this is a mandated public information meeting. It's not a public hearing. These have been referred to in the past a couple times as public hearings. It's not a hearing. Saratoga Biochar does not propose to land apply biosolids. That's been suggested. We will not handle or process biosolids outside of our proposed facility. Everything is done indoors under negative air pressure. We'll describe to you what that is and how that works and why we do it as we get into this. Saratoga Biochar is not an ethanol refinery. It's not anything like an ethanol refinery. Some claims were made that because my partner Bryce Meeker worked at a company that built an ethanol refinery and had environmental problems, that perhaps that was his fault. Bryce was a 1099 contractor, independent consultant for that organization, and he left that company 2 years before they had to shut down because he didn't like what he saw going on there. So I actually commend Bryce for removing himself from that situation and moving on and finding a better outlet for his talent. Another thing that's been said repeatedly is that PFAS can't be destroyed. Well, it can and will be destroyed in our process. PFAS can also be captured in a properly designed air emissions control system, such as Saratoga Biochar proposes to install. And moreover, the levels of PFAS in biosolids are extremely low. There have been many comparisons. We'll take questions at the public comment period, if you would please be kind. Many claims made about concentrations of PFAS and then associations made to things like the horrible disaster in Hoosick Falls, where a manufacturer was using very high volumes and concentrations of PFAS, and it got into groundwater. That's horrible. We don't use PFAS for anything. We don't emit PFAS into the soil, the groundwater, or the air. So that's that. Our technology is not new and untested. That claim's been made. Thermal treatment, thermal oxidation, and industrial air emissions control equipment have been in existence for many decades. We have a relatively new and unique configuration of those industrial applications to process biosolids, but the processing various types of sludge, whether it's contaminated soils or other sorts of organic wastes, have been around for a long time, and the equipment to do that with has been around for a long time. Our manufacturer partner that's producing all the core processing equipment, the dryer, the pyrolysis kiln, and the systems that commute material into and through that system have been in business for 148 years in United States. We field tested biosolids thermal treatment with our partners, and we have tested gases released from the process to understand the mass energy balance. And the carbon fertilizer output we've tested as well. We've tested the biosolids on the way in, we've tested the carbon fertilizer on its way out with third-party independent laboratories, and the results are fantastic. We're very happy with those. And that sort of information is all part of our permit applications with New York State DEC. So the claims that have been made that we're not transparent, that we're hiding things, well, it's just not true. The state-of-the-art biosolids to biochar thermal processing facilities exist. Logan, Australia opened one a couple years ago. It's an excellent example, I think a shining example of what this technology can do, and I recommend you look that up and take a look at it and develop your own opinion about it. Logan, Australia.
Can I ask what the name of it is, just because I lose track of my questions by the end? What's the name of the company in Logan, Australia, where it is?
I don't have to look that up. Off the top of my head, I don't know.
You were referring to it as a reference for you guys. Okay.
It is, yeah. And if you'd like me to...
the name of the company.
Off the top of my head, no. Yeah. Okay. Can we do the comment period? Yeah, all right. And while you're getting ready to ask your questions, I'll look it up so I can answer that. I've seen their video like 10 times. I think it's really cool. At the moment, the name of the company is escaping me. I apologize. And so, let's see, where was I here? State-of-the-art biosolids to biochar thermal Logan, Australia. We've retained experienced science and engineering talent for the design of our processing system, our emissions controls, our facility design, and material handling. We found the best in the business to help us develop this technology in this facility. Project overview, the map you see up on there shows the 2-mile radius around. I know it's kind of hard to see what that is, but if you live in the area, you kind of recognize that's Moreau and South Glens Falls and Hudson Falls and Fort Edward. 2-mile radius around the facility, those are that's the radius of which the DEC's required us to notify community members to attend this meeting if they'd like to. And the shaded areas are what were considered environmental justice disadvantaged community zones. And as I just mentioned at the start, Fort Edward is no longer considered a disadvantaged community by DEC as of Monday. So what we intend to do here is build and operate a carbon fertilizer manufacturing facility on 5.89 acres within the Moreau Industrial Park. We'll receive only non-hazardous biosolids feedstock from local, regional, municipal wastewater treatment facilities. When I say regional, I refer to the Northeast, effectively Casella Organics operating territory, and clean wood waste feedstock to manufacture carbon fertilizer for beneficial use. We'll construct the facility in 3 phases over roughly 5 years, maybe 6 years. And we'll talk a little bit more as we get into this why 3 phases and how that helps us assure ourselves, New York State DEC, and the community of our ability to do this safely, because we're starting slow and ramping up. The application was submitted in October 2021 to New York State DEC for a solid waste management facility and a state air facility permit. We will have regulated emissions, hence the need for the air permit, and we will be handling a regulated waste. Biosolids is a regulated waste. The transport of it, the handling of it requires the permit. And the Moreau Planning Board approved our site plan with 16 environmental health and safety conditions in August of 2022. And now I'd like to get into a little bit here about the purpose of the project, the background, why are we doing this, what's good about it, and I'm going to turn it over to my partner Bryce Meeker to take you through that topic.
Hi, thank you. I'm Bryce Meeker. Our project has several purposes, and it covers a lot of ground. We're basically 2 different industries, one a fertilizer producer, the other a biosolids disposal solution. We prefer to be called recycling because that's really what we're doing. We're recycling one, turning into another. So kind of like Rumpelstiltskin, if you will. First and foremost, we recover resources. This is a resource that's currently wasted today. Most of it's going to landfills or incinerators in the state. It's, what everyone's calling a waste, I see organic matter, carbon, nutrients, micronutrients, things that the soil needs. And that's more or less why we're trying to repurpose this material, clean it up, and put it into a fertilizer product. But to do that, we've got to destroy contaminants, particularly PFAS. We call that the determining constituent because PFOA, for instance, is the most difficult form of PFAS to destroy. And once, it's a volatile organic compound, much like microplastics or hormones or pharmaceutical products. These all things are lesser chains to break. And, so if we can basically take PFOA out of the equation, all the other volatile organic compounds are already taken care of, more or less, in the thermal process. But we're basically displacing two dirty industries. Biosolids disposal, putting this in landfill creates methane emissions, creates odors, pathogenic risks. It's a place where viruses breed. And you've got vector risks. As you can see in our picture, you got all kinds of birds spreading that around, insects as well. The other side is the chemical fertilizer manufacturing, which we displace by producing a substitute for it. Most chemical fertilizers either mined and have an extensive, global transportation footprint, or they're coming from natural gas, and in the form of anhydrous ammonia, which is extremely dangerous to. There's a lot of deaths a year just in agriculture from that handling of that material alone. So we displace the carbon footprints from both these industries by creating a biofertilizer out of a waste product. And what's really interesting is the way we do it. You can say there's Milorganite on the market already. Okay, they're doing it already. Well, they're only drying the biosolids. We take it a step further. And when we take it a step further with pyrolysis, we transform that carbon into a fixed carbon. Now, what does that mean? It means it's not going to degrade for about 1,000 years compared to next season. So by fixing this carbon in your soil, you're creating sort of a permanent absorbent in the soil that sequesters carbon and helps to affect climate change, but it also helps to rebuild the soil. I mean, a lot of times, a lot of the nutrient pollution we have today is because our soils have been corroded over by extensive use of chemical fertilizers since we discovered them right after World War II. It's been the last 80 years we've seen soil carbon tank in this country. And now you've got a, dead zone the size of New Jersey in the Gulf of Mexico. Chesapeake Bay, who wants to swim in that? Nutrient pollution is the key thing that we're trying to avoid by refurbishing and restoring soils with our product. And in the meantime, we're protecting human health. The biggest issues are emissions, what's coming out of our stack. But also, what are we helping in the ground? By restoring the soil and its ability to filter out pollutants and contain them instead of letting them flow downstream, we protect human health in a variety of ways by intervening in this fashion. So the scope of work, our facility layout, it's pretty basic. We receive feedstock. You'll see in there a couple of large, very tall garage doors. That's where the biosolids deliveries are backed into the building. Those doors are shut. That is a very tall building because it's a 40-foot trailer that's tipping inside of a building. We're going through that expense of having the trucks tip inside the building just so there's no odors released and we don't disturb any neighbors. In fact, the whole process could be built outside or put in a building for that very reason. And I think there's a misquote in the article about last night's meeting. We're not using oxygen in the process. It's called negative air pressure. Basically, our air system brings air into the building from outside, not oxygen, because that's explosive. And it basically controls those odors. It manages it so they don't get out. When you open a door, you get a breeze coming into the building, not going out of the building. That's what that means. So the feedstock storage and processing, is the next part. So this is dumped into an in-ground pit that's covered and sealed when the trucks are not there. Again, that's just simply to control odors, to keep any kind of nuisances in check. Wood feedstock is taken through a small secondary grinder. We've actually gotten out of the larger grinder we had initially. We don't have any noise issues. We've downgraded to just basically a small hammer mill. We're taking chip from other facilities and just making sure it's consistent coming into our facility. Phase 1 manufacturing process area is where the first line will go. Again, we're developing this in 3 stages. So you see our permit applications, our emissions targets, that's for the entire facility. We're starting with 1/3 of that capacity. So not 50 trucks a day, we're starting with about 20 trucks a day, because we still have to service the different chemicals we need for the hydrated lime, for the scrubbers and the sulfuric acid. These things have to come to us anyway. So we're really starting with a small footprint and expanding. And I think that should go a long ways in demonstrating that we want to see everything in every step of the way, the DEC has to approve of the next expansion. And that means stack testing, that means emission testing, that means we're being held accountable for what we're saying today to expand. And you'll see we've got a couple extra shaded in buildings. Well, that's where the next 2 lines go. We're not even building the building for this yet. That's coming later. For the carbon storage and loading, you see outdoor carbon areas. We'll also be bagging the product in large super sacks. Again, these will be basically put on flatbed trucks, or the bulk carbon will be put into a hopper truck and hauled off-site. According to the DEC rules and regulations, we can only have 1 week's supply of biosolids that we produce, or biochar that we produce on-site at any given time. So we've got to manufacture it and move it. And that goes to the off-site end use of carbon fertilizer. It's mainly directed at farms, greenhouses. The material makes an excellent fertilizer product. It also makes a great grow medium for indoor cultivation. It's a way to keep local food production, quite frankly, and improve it. They can go on and on about the fertilizer, but we consider this a revolutionary fertilizer because most of them are, degrading soils, where ours restores it. Facility transport. We have a single hauler that provides us all of our biosolids, Casella Organics. We're very proud to have them on board, quite frankly. Casella is one of the only waste and recycling companies among the founding members of the EPA Climate Leaders Program. And they've reduced their carbon footprint by 45% from 2005 to 2010. Furthermore, they're on the path to cut those emissions another 40% by 2030. We chose Casella because they're the most progressive out there, quite frankly. And I think they've been criticized quite a lot in the media, unduly. And I think they need to be recognized for some of the contributions they've made to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. They also established Vermont's first recycling facility in 1977. I mean, these guys were leaders. Quite honestly, I'm proud that they're backing our project. That puts us in the class of being the first recycling facility. We're just the first recycling facility for biosolids. So I just wanted to put that in there because I've seen their name dragged through the mud by the Post-Star recently, which is actually the leading journalist is based out of Columbus, Ohio, believe it or not. And, just to recognize that. Truck traffic limits. We'll be receiving between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. Monday through Saturday. Maximum of 50 trucks per day at full facility build out. Like I said, phase 1, about 20 trucks a day. As we progress, we'll be bringing another 15 in phase 2 and another 15 for phase 3. About 80% of the loads going to and from the facility are biosolids. The other 3 are biochar, our carbon fertilizer, other things we need like sulfuric acid for our ammonia scrubber. By the way, that's another misinformation out there. The Post-Star basically said that we are emitting sulfuric acid. We're actually paying for it. It's an input to our production process. It goes in the ammonia scrubber to remediate ammonia effluent out of our stack. It's there to keep our emissions low. It's a preventative measure to keep our emissions under check. So the Monroe Industrial Park, and it's a very large number, but I mean, it's basically the generic environmental impact study rated it at over 1,200 trucks per hour. And we've been getting a lot of feedback saying, well, why didn't you redo another traffic study? Well, to really justify another traffic study, you got to be hitting at least 100 trucks in peak hour of the day. We're only hitting 50 a day. I just want to put these figures into perspective because they get thrown around like, it's a big figure. Well, if you were to have any logistics facility, a light industrial use in this park, you'd be looking at 100 trucks an hour. So being a manufacturing facility, we keep that road congestion way down relative to any kind of other logistics facility by any stretch of the imagination. And trucks follow established industrial park truck route. Now this truck route was established when the industrial park was established over 20 years ago. Biosolids trucks deposit or tip biosolids into the sealed concrete indoor covered pits for temporary storage. We have 3 days of storage capacity. Why? Well, we can only receive from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. 6 days a week, and Mondays are often holidays, or they're holiday weekends. And so we have to be able to cover that downtime. Our facility will operate 24/7. It's a pyrolytic process. Much like any other pyrolytic process, you want to keep it running. You don't start and stop it all the time. That's where you get a lot of inefficiencies, and that's where you can have other events happen. We keep it running completely all the time, 24/7. Ambient air from receiving area and pits is treated by the emission control system. So all the negative pressure that we're bringing into this building flows through our equipment and through our advanced air treatment system, where it's scrubbed for particulates, sulfur compounds, numerous other compounds, mercaptans, et cetera, ammonia. And we're actually, the one thing we're really bringing in from abroad, from other countries, are bioscrubbers, because we don't really have them in America. What are bioscrubbers good for? Odors. And we're using, it's the most ecological means, because we're actually using microbes to destroy the odors. It makes it very ecological. I mean, most other plants would put another thermal oxidizer on the back of this thing. Burn more gas, get rid of it. Well, we take an ecological approach. We went with a wet scrubbing system mainly because it's the most economical and, most ecological approach to air treatment. So the facility process, and this is something we get to understand. We receive feedstock at the facility. We have a decision to make. We receive it or we send it back. Hazardous materials, we send back. Anything but biosolids and what we're regulated by the DEC to receive, we send back. So if somebody threw a motor in a load of biosolids, for instance, well, that motor would go back. We're not going to process it, for instance. A lot of things end up in bins. You've got to be careful. Assuming we accept it, it goes into our storage and process. It goes through the whole process that we described here, and I'll tell you a bit more about that in a second. And then we distribute the carbon fertilizer, which is legal to distribute in New York. I just want to clarify that. And it goes to off-end use predominantly in agriculture, but also in horticulture. Those are the main uses. It actually also makes a very good soil amendment for cleaning up like roadways and constraining any kind of chemicals that spill off roadways or contaminated soils, brownfield site remediation. Those are other value-added uses of our material that I'd just like to point out, just so you understand the value of having a carbon absorbent in your soil helps constrain constituents from getting into the water supply. So our facility process, we try to simplify it. I know it can be very complex, but it starts with feedstock preparation, bringing in the waste wood. We chip it up, we get it the right particle size. We bring in the biosolids, we mix these things together. We bring them into a drying situation. We dry them down. Okay, those first two processes are practiced in numerous municipalities throughout the United States today. You ever heard of Milorganite? It's a dried biosolids fertilizer that you can go in Walmart or any of the big box stores and buy. It's out there already. Now, if you want me to compare us to Milorganite, I'll tell you we're a lot better. By carbonizing it, we change the whole greenhouse gas perspective. We are carbon negative, where they use a lot of gas to do their process. We basically create gas to dry it. Okay, so there's a lot of real big efficiencies, but the Milorganite will never sequester any carbon because they're not fixing that carbon in a way that avoids deterioration. Think of fixed carbon like fossilized carbon. You find a fossil, well, it's been there for thousands of years. When you look back 1,000 years from now, you're going to find biochar in the soil, much like we find it in the Amazon River Basin, where it was initially practiced by ancient tribes there. You can still see today what happened over 500-600 years ago in the Amazon Basin. Dark, black earth soil patches in the middle of a rainforest. Who would ever thought that's possible? The early explorers didn't ever anticipate seeing such population densities, large populations, in the middle of a rainforest, where the soil is literally that thick and you can't farm it. Look what happened to the Aztecs. They were wiped out by starvation because they couldn't manage it. But in the Amazon with biochar, they did. That's something you got to think about in terms of our future and our sustainability of our path we're on. After the dryer is where we really get interesting. We take it through the reactor. The reactor is a pyrolysis process, okay? This is basically, and you've all probably seen a campfire burning wood. Well, if you look real close, the wood's not what's burning. What's really burning is the gas that's being emitted from that wood. So you'll see a little gap between the wood and the fire. Well, what we do is extend that gap. In a pyrolysis unit, we basically prevent any flame from occurring, and so that gas doesn't get directly burned, like if you're directly combusting it. Instead, that is transferred to another device where it's remediated efficiently. It's called an advanced thermal oxidizing system. We run it through a reducing zone, so we control nitrogen compounds like nitrogen dioxide, nitrous oxide, a very potent greenhouse gas, 300 times the CO2 potential. We prevent them from occurring. We manage the production of those. At the same time, we're bringing up to enough temperature to remediate the PFAS that we separated from the material in the process there. So that reactor process is an advancement over a dried fertilizer plant. It also produces 68% of the natural gas used in the dryer. So we've cut our natural gas expense and reduced the resources we're using to make this happen materially. So that thermal oxidizer supplies heat to the dryer in kind of a closed loop fashion. And then after the dryer, which picks up odors and other compounds, just like any other biosolids dryer, we run it through an advanced air treatment. It takes sulfur dioxide, a bunch of mercaptans, other odor-causing compounds. In one scrubber, we take out particulates. In a wet scrubber and a dry cyclone, the dry cyclone goes back into our system so that we recover as much as possible and we waste as little as possible. What goes in the wet scrubber? Well, that is basically taken to our thermal oxidizer. Why? Because the little bit of dust we get, the really fine particles that wet scrubber picks up, still contain minute traces of PFAS and other contaminants. Traces, keep in mind. But we take that water into our thermal oxidizer to maintain temperatures in the thermal oxidation process. And in effect of doing that, we remediate that water. So that's how we can be a sort of an endpoint for PFAS and other volatile organic compounds that currently every other solution emits. I mean, that's the advancement here. I mean, I like to refer to us as the cleanup guys, quite frankly, because that's what we're doing. We're decontaminating a resource to make it available for biofertilizer production nationally. So we have a very limited sewer discharge. What's going to the atmosphere has been through one of the most robust air treatment systems you could possibly imagine today. Far more advanced than anything that's been put on the back of any biosolids dryer nationally. So let me get to the project schedule. Environmental and building permit, we expect to be completed here in the next few months. April, May, we're at the end of our very long process of getting these permits. We expect to begin phase 1 construction towards the end of the year, September, November timeframe, and complete in about a year. Equipment installation is going to occur sort of towards the end of next year, and we expect the facility startup in December of next year, 2024. And that's just for phase 1 of the facility. We want to get it operating its capacity by roughly May and be in commercial production by May 2025. After that, we're going to go through a series of stack tests and emission tests. And there will be a lot of scrutiny expressed by the regulators to see if we are actually doing what we say. I like to say that we are going to be held accountable for what we put in our permit applications and what we say to you here today. But the DEC is the regulatory agency that will be overseeing that as a state air permit and state solid waste handling permit that we're going to be receiving. For us to proceed to phase 2 construction, we need to pass that mark. We need to prove out our emissions and get their blessing and the town, and to be able to do the next phase. And then after that's done, to do the third phase, we've got to go through that process again. We expect the operating life of the facility to be about 30 years, culminating roughly around in 2054. But we'd like to be able to complete, hopefully the facility will be done by 2026, 2027. So it's a long build. We're taking it in steps, one step at a time, if you will. And we're going to be checked at every point. So just to go back, the emission figures you see in our permit applications and these big figures, we're starting with 1/3 of that capacity. We're being conservative. We want to true it up, make sure everything's correct before we go to phase 2 and 3. There's another natural reason for that, is this facility, once fully completed, will consume about 15% of the state's biosolids. It does take time to redirect that material to us. 15% of the state biosolids. So in effect, we are solving the problem. Now currently, that similar amount is going out of state. It's being shipped on trains to Alabama, landfills, halfway across the country. And I said it last night, I'll say it again. New York is ahead of the curve in PFAS awareness. They're ahead of the curve in constituents and other contaminants. Well, what's going to happen when they figure it out? What do you think you're going to do with your biosolids? You're going to export it? To who? I mean, the export option is a limited option. And the more people know about it, and we're going to be vocal about what we're doing, the more people know about it, the less that's going to be an option for you in the future. So that's the problem we solve. Potential impacts. Impacts on land. The project complies with applicable zoning and land use standards within the Monroe Industrial Park. These were standards that were established over 20 years ago. No zoning variances were needed or applied for, meaning we fit. Impacts on plants and animals. The generic impact statement from Monroe Industrial Park confirms no presence of threatened or endangered species on the property. Impact on energy. The facility minimizes energy use by recovering waste heat and reutilizing renewable syngas for energy. That's the energy from biosolids we're generating and using on site. It's the most efficient use of renewable energy you could possibly achieve. Extremely efficient. Impacts on air. We'll have 3 stacks that will emit regulated air emissions. These will be tested. We'll have to maintain operating records, continual operating records of these things. Impacts on noise, odor, and light. The facility equipment and process have potential to generate fugitive noise and odor. Like I said, we've tried to design this building for negative air pressure. The entire process is inside to constrain noise and odors. I mean, we're trying to do the best we can to make sure that this doesn't become a nuisance to anybody. I mean, that's our goal. That's what we want. Why? Because we intend to sell this technology to wastewater treatment plants nationally and globally. And if we can't hit all the points that they require, we don't have a future as a company. This is all for nothing. So if we don't hit these points, if we aren't safe, if we don't maintain and ensure that we are a very low emission process, a negative greenhouse gas footprint, meaning we offset more than twice of what we emit. More than twice. 137% more than we emit, to be precise. And that's a life cycle greenhouse gas analysis done by eco-engineers, a third-party engineering consultant. If we can't maintain this public safety aspects, if we can't maintain the odors and constrain them, and these are issues that currently affect wastewater treatment plants. The way they handle their biosolids is typically the culprit. So that's where we're looking to not only improve the community here, but everywhere else in the country with this technology. How are we mitigating the impacts? Air emissions. Air pollution control system consists of an advanced thermal oxidizer, which is a huge expense, cyclone separator, wet scrubbers, and bioscrubbers to maintain air emissions well below regulatory standards. And we're approximately 50% of the regulatory standards to be under Title V. I mean, in Title V permit would be like a power plant, a landfill, something large of that nature. Our emissions are quite low. We're about halfway to the threshold of being a Title V. So we're well under the air emissions required, for instance, that we would require an environmental impact statement. Construction is in phases, and that's to allow us to confirm the emissions and permit compliance before adding more capacity. I mean, it just makes sense. Emission monitoring, testing, and reporting will also be a big part of what we do. Again, we're not just trying to prove this to you, we're trying to prove this to the world. This information is valuable to us and our future. Noise and odor. An enclosed building with negative air pressure contains and manages odors and noise inside the building. Noise and odor mitigation and continuous monitoring are required by the town of Monroe. It's part of the permit, the site plan approval that was given to us last August by a conditional site plan approval by the town of Moreau. There are 16 conditions we have to abide by. I'm not sure of this, but it's probably one of the most any applicant has ever received in history. Biosolids receiving, handling, and processing are all performed indoors. And to add to that, the trucks are tarped and sealed, coming to our facility and leaving our facility. If there's anything on them, we've got a truck wash inside that where we receive the biosolids. We'll wash it off. We've got pressure washers there for that very reason. And then the air pollution control system removes odors from exhaust air, and these are all coming from the manufacturer guarantees. We're dealing with a world-class air treatment company, Condor Chem. And then they're putting odor reduction and emission reduction guarantees on this. So the local site plan review timeline, I guess July 2021, just to go through the history of what we've kind of been through to date before I'm sitting in front of you. This isn't recent, this has been going on for some time. We originally submitted the site plan application to the Town and Road Planning Board in July 2021. In August 21 through August 22, we had 9 planning board meetings with the Town of Moreau. It was not a quick process. It was a very long and difficult process. December 2021, the first planning board public hearing occurred. On March 2022, the planning board completed the state environmental quality review with a negative declaration. On May 2022, the second planning board public hearing occurred. And in August 2022, we received a site plan approval with 16 conditions. I'll turn this over to Andrew to go through the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation permit application status.
Yep, good afternoon. My name is Andrew Millspaugh with Sterling Environmental Engineering. I'm a professional engineer assisting Saratoga Biochar with their permit applications with the State Department of Environmental Conservation. In October of 2021, we submitted applications for a solid waste management facility permit under Part 360 of the regulations and an air state facility permit under Part 201 of the regulations. As part of that application process, there's a demonstration of consistency with the state and local solid waste management plans, which emphasize a reduction of landfill disposal of waste, including biosolids. As part of that, there's also a demonstration of consistency with the more recent Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, the CLCPA, which again also emphasizes a decrease in landfill disposal of waste materials and overall reductions in greenhouse gases with targeted timeline goals of being achieved as early as 2030, which we're quickly approaching. Following that, the submittal of the applications in October of 2021, up to currently today, where we're at is a technical review process with the state, back and forth with requests for information, submitting more information, and back and forth with the technical reviewers. That has been ongoing. In August of 2022, the DEC indicated a need to perform enhanced public participation for this application, which is what this meeting and process is about. It's an opportunity to provide direct information to the community about the project and provide an opportunity for the community to get information, ask questions, and make comments. This all gets summarized and submitted as part of the application process to the DEC. And again, as part of that, the application is not complete as of yet. This is still an ongoing review with the state. Once that application is deemed complete, there will be a separate notice apart from these meetings in the Environmental News Bulletin, which is an online publication, as well as in the local newspaper. That will provide information on how to submit comments at that time as part of that process for a 30-day comment period, and those will be taken into consideration by the state. At the end of this presentation, there's also going to be contact information for if you choose to submit comments at any time directly to the state. Yep, so we can go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, part of the process is a consistency review with the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. That became effective in January 2020. A lot of ambitious goals in there: diversion of waste from landfills, reduction in greenhouse gases. There was a scoping plan issued in December of 2021, which provided a roadmap for how the state was going to achieve these goals. There's specific recommendations in there for managing biosolids. which is why technologies like this are advancing in New York State. The public comment period for that closed in the summer of 2022, and the final scoping plan was issued more recently in December of 2022. Specific guidance and regulations are currently being developed, but compliance is expected now to achieve the goals as early as 2030. Within that consistency assessment, there is a demonstration that the introduction of a new facility and a management practice will not provide a net increase in greenhouse gas reductions. An update from the December public meeting that was held was, since then, as Bryce mentioned a couple minutes ago, their independent greenhouse gas life cycle analysis has been completed by eco-engineers in February of this year, which indicates a net greenhouse gas reduction of 137% compared to the base disposal method of biosolids. And then the final bullets on here provide a representation of at full capacity what this facility would manage compared to equivalent disposal methods that are currently in practice. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Ray for the closeout on the information.
Thanks, Andrew. So information access, we have a document repository on our project website, saratogabiochar.com/PPP. And therein you'll find all the up-to-date documents relative to our DEC permit applications and thank you.
It happens.
You're right, exactly. I was ready to get up.
That's the wrap up.
On our
might have time for
website,
it today.
you'll find the document repository there with all the permit application related documents, and you'll find a recording of a virtual public meeting that we held on December 19th there as well. And after we're complete with this one today, sometime within the next several days, we will also post up there the video of this meeting and the one from yesterday, along with the attendee records, et cetera. We also have a project social media page on Facebook. And to submit comments, you can contact New York State DEC directly in their Region 5 office in Warrensburg, and they have an email there that you can grab if you need, or you can come get it from me afterwards if you need, or I can leave this up on the screen for a bit. And identify the project. Typically, the application number is the key identifier, but it's become relatively well known. And if you just mention Saratoga Biochar project, you'll probably get an answer. Relative to project contacts amongst us, you can use our general email, which is info@saratogabiochar.com. You can contact Bryce directly. There's his email and his phone number, and there's our mailing address locally. So with that, I'm going to flip it back. And again, you can get this from me later before you leave today, or you can find it on our website, this information about how to submit comments or contact us. I'll leave this up for a bit, but I think at this point, we'll open it up for public questions and comments. And we're going to, go ahead, we're going to set up a microphone for you and ask people to stand up so we can see and hear you. We'll ask that each person making a comment or a question just please provide your name and where you're from, what town you're from, and go ahead and take the floor. If we can respond to questions with answers or comments, we will, and if we can't, we'll just defer.
My name is John Stevenson. I live in Moreau.
Hi, John.
Hi. The 50 trucks a day, that's total input, or that's input and output?
That's round trip, yep. 50 deliveries per day. And this question
So
came up.
50 input and then products on top of that going out?
No, total.
That's
so
total,
including output. Right?
Total
Yeah.
truck volume round trip. So that includes biosolids, wood deliveries, and biochar or carbon fertilizer pickup, as well as delivery of supplies.
At full build-out.
That's at full build out with all three phases operating.
And at that point, that represents about 15% of the state's biosolids.
Yeah, that's simply a good representation to give people the context of quantity. It doesn't mean it's all coming from New York. It'll come from
Okay.
regionally from the Northeast, from Casella's operating area, which includes, locations, Vermont,
Okay, I understand.
Western Mass, et cetera, New York.
Total about 40 biosolids trucks a day at most, about
Are-
80%.
Are heavy metals an issue with this product?
They do exist in biosolids in trace amounts. We've tested the inbound biosolids and the outbound biochar. The amounts are low enough not to be of concern.
So let me tell you how we manage that, particularly in operations, but we're also upheld to EPA 503 standards. when it comes to handling biosolids products. So just to give you an idea of how it works, so wastewater treatment plant has to test regularly their what's going out of the facility, the biosolids they're producing. And so we get those reports and we vet them before we even say, yeah, we'll accept that waste. Before we get to that point, we see what they're producing, we understand what there is, if there's any issues with heavy metals or anything like that. Now, our process does consolidate heavy metals somewhat in the material. Now, some of these things like copper and whatnot are really good for plants, okay? So iron, for instance, as well. I mean, there's a lot in it that is actually good for plants when recycled as a fertilizer. But we are also tested on the back end on our product going out for heavy metals. And if we can't stay within a certain bandwidth, what we call what's known as the excellent quality Class A biosolids product, then if we can't maintain that low level of heavy metals in the product, then we can't sell it at Walmart or big box stores. We actually have to trace where it's going on every field. We don't want to do that, okay? And so we will be maintaining it operationally to continue to have an excellent quality Class A biosolids product coming from this facility. And that takes managing what's coming in and testing what's going out for verification. So I just want to explain the process of that. Those are the few things we cannot eliminate with thermal treatment.
Thank you, John. Anybody else? Please.
Yes.
I'm Cynthia Roberts. I live in Kingsbury, which is not the town of Moreau. It's the town of Hudson Falls, and it's out in the country. We have our own septic systems, et cetera, so we're not really directly related.
Thank you. Would you kindly provide your name and again where you're from?
Yeah.
Yep, Cynthia Roberts, and
Cynthia.
that's Kingsbury, Hudson Falls.
Thank you.
Yep, you got it. So a question, and maybe you can clarify if this is misinformation or accurate information. I appreciate that. I had heard, that New York State currently doesn't regulate all PFAS. Is that true? Is what is being measured and what's going to be regulated, is that actually a full span of the PFAS? And is it an accurate reflection for the company that the temperature demonstrated by the EPA is the correct temperature to actually break these bonds? So it's a two-part question.
Okay.
I have others, but I'll save that for so other people.
Do you want to tackle those the two-part
Yes,
question first?
I would love
Okay.
that.
In the short answer is no, New York State doesn't regulate PFAS yet effectively, and we will be the first facility of this kind in the country and the first facility to actually have an air emissions PFAS limit threshold in our permit. I'll turn it over to Andrew to provide additional detail about what the state is moving towards in that regard.
Yeah, and in terms of regulation, so it's an evolving topic, PFAS, and you've probably heard of PFOA and PFOS, and then on and on and on. But currently, in terms of like water, for example, drinking water, there are MCLs set for PFOA and PFOS. EPA came out with 6, recommendations for expanding that from 2 to 6 parameters. There was a question yesterday about test methods for air, and at that time we didn't have the test method in front of us, so I did pull that and bring that here today. So that test method for air tests 50 compounds, PFOA, PFOS, and on down for 50 parameters. As Ray mentioned, the permit will have a limit in there for PFOA, and the reason there's not limits for every single constituent at this point is because they have to have a risk-based assessment on what number to set, what limit to set. It's not just arbitrary. So they start with the data that they have. In this instance, for air emissions, the treatment is the thermal oxidizer, and the data that we have currently is that the temperatures will mitigate the PFOA, the PFOS, and on and on. And when you mitigate one, the understanding is you're demonstrating one against the standard, but that treatment doesn't just selectively treat that one. It treats that category. It treats those volatile compounds. So there might be a standard for one, and that's what you're comparing to for your permit, but that treatment technology treats that class of compounds, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. And then there was again, if you...
Yep.
ahead.
If you could clarify if this is information or misinformation. The temperature, I understood from, some information I saw, that the temperature required to actually correctly treat and break down, dissolve the bonds. I mean, I'm not an artist. I mean, I am an artist, not an engineer, so would be helpful to know that the temperature has to be something like 2,600 or above, as opposed to the 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit that is proposed in your planning. So if you could clarify if that's accurate or not, that would be helpful. And also, given what you've just told us, will there be a sort of scaffolding as to the regulation and as to the testing available? Because if this sort of PFAS regulation is in its infancy and we don't have any evidence, aside from perhaps case studies in Australia or whatever, of this industry being executed in an environment such as this, so how will we know? It's fine to say that it's being regulated and tested, but if the testing process is in its infancy and the identification and verification of that is virtually unknown if it's in an infancy state, what's the next steps, and how will we find out as citizens breathing the air and all that?
Great. So I think I can tackle that. The very debatable topic of what the temperature is required to crack the carbon fluorine bonds in PFAS. So there is an EPA study that says it's got to be over 2,600, 2,640, something like that. Our thermal oxidizer manufacturer has attested that 2,300 degrees will suffice and will be very effective, and they are assuring us and guaranteeing the process. So that's the maximum temperature in our TO, thermal oxidizer, and it's a 3-stage system. That's called the reducing zone, and then from there it steps down in temperature and continues to crack and break apart the remaining components of those compounds. And your question about emissions controls, so stack testing will be required. We don't have a permit yet, so we don't know. This was a topic discussed a bit last night. We don't know yet what the frequency is going to be required. There are testing methods in development, and some are available today. It's when you stack test for something like that, you have to grab a sample. It's not something where you can just stick a monitor up there and it constantly tells you what's going on. You literally have to grab a sample of emissions and send it to a lab, okay? And so we had a good discussion last night with some of the folks about, depending on what the DEC requires of us, if we all agree that, well, you know what, I don't think that gives the community enough assurance, it's not enough, then we've agreed to look at that and potentially do more testing than they require. But we'd like to first see what the permit conditions are, okay? Did that help? Did I get it? Okay.
I can add a little bit to that too. I mean, part of what we're doing first is we're using pyrolysis to get the PFAS off the material. Now that differs from direct combustion or incineration, in that we're kind of weeding out the incomplete combustion that could occur with incineration, which is why you've got to get to a much higher temperature to fully remediate it. So initially, by taking it and separating the volatile organic compounds, which include a whole class of microplastics, hormones, a bunch of other things as well, separating that from the material first makes it more volatile and easier to destroy. So I'd like to add that just so you understand that it's not apples to apples here, and we've been compared, I think here we're incineration in disguise is what we've been described by those who oppose us. Well, that's one of the key differences between incineration and what we're doing. The other key difference is the amount of biochar, the 25,000 tons a year we're producing of biochar, the carbon fertilizer product, would ordinarily be emitted by an incinerator if it's fully burned and sent to the atmosphere, such as happening in the Wheelbarator incinerator now. So we are avoiding a massive amount of emissions the way we're operating this machine, if you will, or this process. So just want to give you that additional color.
Thank you. Does that suffice?
Yeah, I'm still a little bit unclear as to how the future kind of scaffolding of knowing that some of the PFAS will be broken up just based on, as your engineer said, the identification of a few of them will ultimately result in the process affecting all the others potentially. But how will we get access to that information if this project does go forward?
So from a reporting standpoint, our intention
Yeah.
is and commitment is full transparency. So whatever lab testing we are required to do and additional testing that we opt to do, we will
Yep.
publish those third-party independent certified
Yep.
laboratory results on our project website for the public to see.
Yep.
If we have a problem, we'll stop operations and fix it. I also want to point out, though, in addition to this, so there's a lot of talk about how do you break PFAS? What's the temperature? What if you don't get it all? I think
Yeah.
a lot of people are overlooking that you can also capture it in an air emissions control system. If God forbid, we can't get it all in the cracking process, we can get it before it gets out the stack. The thermal oxidizer is not the last stop. I call it the PFAS killer, but it's not the last stop.
It's not the last.
So there's that to consider.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
And
just-
before we,
Yes.
oh, sorry. Before we go to the next question, I just wanted to get back to the question about the Logan example. It was actually constructed by the municipality. It was designed, conceived, designed, planned, and contracted and constructed by the municipality. So there isn't a company behind it, which probably explains why I couldn't remember what the company was.
Okay.
It's called Pyrocol.
Pyrocol, yeah.
Pyrocol.
PTY
has
Ltd.
been around for years creating biochar from nutshells
Yeah.
and wood waste. This is their first biosolids project. They've been in operation for about a year in Australia.
Yep.
About a year ago, April, it was in partnership with the town of Logan to do their 38,000 tons roughly of biosolids. And there's no test data available, which would be helpful, but you're correct. There is a company.
Thank you for pointing that out. I reviewed the project website that the municipality has, and that information is not available there. So I
It's right
thank
there.
you for
We got it on
enlightening
the
me.
corporate website.
Thank
It is, I'm looking at our corporate website now, and it's the same, but I would also point out that Pyrocol is advocating a different technology than we are as well. They're using gasification. Gasification is a technology that it's kind of like between pyrolysis and incineration. It's partial combustion of the gas inside the kiln, if you will. You can't control it as well as you can with pyrolysis. Like in our system, like in the pyrolysis unit, there's no flame. Nothing's being burnt. It's a gas that's being separated. Like I said, that little gap between the fire and the wood and the campfire, that gap is being extended where the fire is occurring in a different piece of equipment. In gasification, it occurs in the kiln. And that's not as easy to control. And you can also get impartial combustion. So we've seen, it's not as good of a remediation process, quite frankly, than what we're proposing here. Pyrolysis gives us a whole new level of control far beyond what a gas fire could deliver.
Thank you. Next comment or question? Any hands up?
We've got some online questions.
Maybe someone from
Okay,
remote, if you could.
we've got some online questions. We're going to go to Hands Off the Hudson. You were in first. I've just sent an unmute request to you.
Can you hear me?
Volume.
Yep. She brought in.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
So my students were just reviewing some of the statements that we went over yesterday, and unfortunately they had to catch the bus.
Could
They
state your
will-
Could we
name,
ask you to
please?
state your name and where you're from, please, before you start?
Sure, I
Thank
spoke
you.
yesterday. Shannon Gillis, Hands Off the Hudson. So I'm sitting in my classroom. We've been watching your presentation. I was just saying the students had to leave. The question that they were concerned about, we do a lot of environmental studying here, and we discussed the comments yesterday that came about with the over pollutants, the limits set by New York State and your product being over the limits that they are allowing for application to lawns. And they also were reading the statements that you guys are here to save us in our environment. And they also heard that you said that you're preventing nutrient overload by using this product. And so the students just wrote down some of their questions, and one was asking you to pick which side of this debate you're going to be on. Are you here to save the environment and prevent nutrient overload from happening in the Hudson River? Or are you promoting a product that is essentially illegal for us to use on our lawns and will contribute to the phosphorus problem in not just the river, but also all of our lakes and streams in the area? So if you could answer that question. Yesterday, I also had 2 questions that they had posed that you did not answer regarding the liability of engineers, and also about the third one I'll have to come back to.
Okay, well, please just state us one question at a time. It's easier to answer that way. Phosphorus, as we said earlier and we addressed in our opening here, that's one of the misinformations from last night's meeting. It's not illegal to sell phosphorus-based fertilizers in New York. Farmers have agricultural loading levels, crop loading levels. Pan levels. They have to abide by. You can't put down too much of any nutrient as a farmer. But the laws and the more or less the guidance that New York has is based on lawn application, not agriculture, or which we're not even anticipating being in that market yet. But nonetheless, I'd like to just dive a little bit into that, because why is that being singled out as a fertilizer? Well, most phosphorus comes in a salt-based form. And what happens when to salt, and this is a question for your students, when it gets wet? Well, it dissolves completely into the water. And that's what happens with the phosphorus as well. It's not attached to anything at that point. It is free floating. And well, if it's raining, that means it floats right down in the river. What we're doing is something a little different. We're using carbon instead of salt, which carbon, if you understand the physics of carbon, is like glue in some levels. I mean, our product can be used, it sticks to a lot of things. Stick to your fingers, sticks to everything it touches. But it's an absorbent as well. It doesn't like to just give off the phosphorus. The phosphorus likes to be attached to something. Well, it is attached to the fertilizer, a carbon fertilizer. If it rains, it's not going anywhere. It stays there. And that's one of the reasons we can actually reduce the amount of nutrients we use, because we're reducing our losses on our fields. So yes, we are very much about saving the water, reducing nutrient loading. And quite honestly, one of the biggest differences between our fertilizer and a chemical fertilizer you're going to find on the market is year after year, you have to increase chemical fertilizer use to get the same result. We actually advocate reducing nutrient loading, because what happens is, even if you're applying salt-based fertilizers with our product, well, when they go floating, they're going to attach to our carbon. And so it helps to constrain it from getting out in the environment. And reducing nutrient losses means reducing nutrient pollution, which is exactly what they're talking about in the streams. So by having a form of bound phosphorus, you prevent it from running off into the water table. Now, what else is the carbon good for? Well, it's good for taking up other contaminants that could be coming into the soil. I mean, soil used to play a very important role in our ecosystem. I say it used to because it doesn't do it as well anymore. We've depleted the carbon in organic matter over the last 80 years substantially. Iowa is some of the best, and I mean, it's from Iowa. That's some of the best soil in this country. But it's nothing like what I saw in Ukraine when I was living over there and working in agriculture. The black earth soil over there, I mean, Adolf Hitler actually exported black earth to Germany during World War II. It's that good of a resource. But we've depleted ours. Because of the extensive use of chemical fertilizers the last 80 years, we're depleting our soils from carbon. That creates erosion. That creates nutrient runoff. It creates the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico that's now the size of New Jersey. There's no fish in a dead zone because there's no oxygen in the water. The plants have grown to the point, the algae have grown because of the nutrients. And if you've been to the Gulf of Mexico recently, you're going to notice a lot more seaweed than you probably remember when you were a kid, because that's absorbing those nutrients as well. So we're trying to advocate a very radically different fertilizer, totally different than what exists today. And instead of depleting soils like chemical fertilizers do today, instead of killing off the carbon and organic matter, we're restoring it and we're replenishing it. And that feeds the biology of the soil, not just the plants. I mean, chemists like to look at it. What do you need to make a plant grow? Well, what do you need to have healthy soils is a very different question. And that's the question we answer.
So That was a great story. It took up a lot of time. Not even.
I'm trying to educate your students for you.
Point. But it's not education. The chemicals coming out of fertilizer doesn't kill organic matter. It provides nutrients for organic matter so that living things.
Are you aware of how much
bloom
salt
out of
content?
control. And so then the bloom actually takes up all the oxygen, and then that actually takes the life source from the river. So you're actually giving a story that's incorrect, but not even the point. You're telling us that your fertilizer is not going to do that, and you said yesterday that you were going to provide us with the data from that, and then that data now we are not able to have. So I could say all day long that my carbon is going to suck things up, and it's going to vacuum, and it's going to reduce all of these things. My students are asking you, besides you telling us the story, which you're very, very good at, where is your proof that your carbon is sucking up these other contaminants, is not leaching through the deionization of our soils? Where is that proof that you have, besides you just talking and telling us and giving us the, oh, and you can trust me, and oh, I'm sure you know, and we're the best you've ever seen, and we have more than you would ever know? It means nothing to a middle schooler if you can't have a data set that you can provide us that shows us that your fertilizer is leaching less phosphorus, nitrogen, and sulfate than a control group. And you're not willing to give us that information. There is no way you're going to look at a 12-year-old and explain to them that we should just trust you. Where's the data? Show us. You're going to be very transparent once you build this facility, right? And you're going to give us all this information.
Absolutely.
But when two educators ask you for the data, what did you say?
To give accurate data, we've got to do a lot of field tests, and that requires commercial production of this material. And
So you don't have the data. You're telling us a story. You're telling us a story. It's theoretical. It's a model. My students know the difference between a model and reality. It's
we
part of our
have nutrient
standard.
analysis from our material. It's extensive. It
And you
goes through
cannot
every.
share it with them.
We can. We've actually put it. It's available. It's part of our with our beneficial use application.
Data set.
It's part of our beneficial use application. We've also stated this in the numerous town board meetings or town planning board meetings with the town of Moreau. It's on public record.
Where?
I just told you where. It's in our
Bryce, we're not,
beneficial
sorry,
use
we're not-
fertilizer
Bryce.
We were told yesterday that we couldn't have it.
We're not here,
So-
we're not here to debate. We're here to allow you the opportunity to
You
ask
are.
a question.
You're
If we can
here to
answer it, we
question.
will,
Where is
or
the
you can
data?
provide comments. We'd like to move to the next caller. Thank you.
Thanks for the data, guys. Awesome.
Okay, we can go to Martin Montreal. You had a question? I'm sending you an unmute request right now. Also,
Okay,
just a brief
I'm
note.
unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, but just a brief note for people in the room. If you do want to talk, you need to be at the microphone because they can't hear you on the other side, and I can't transcribe your questions. Thank you. Go ahead, Martin.
Okay, thank you. My name's Marty Montreal from the town of Moreau. Just want to let you know, for the folks at the front of the room at the table, that there's 42 participants remotely at this moment. So you might not have a sizable crowd there in person, but there's a rather large crowd online here. So, and I just wanted to start off by saying, Ray, you had a slide at the start of your presentation here today with the title of Recent Local Media Misinformation, where you attempted to rebut the new and untested concern by referencing the Logan, Australia site as being the state-of-the-art biosolids to biochar thermal processing facility. And you referenced this today as your bright, shiny example. However, there are at least 5 major differences with the Logan Home wastewater treatment plant as compared to your proposal. So first, its primary function is the manufacturing of syngas, not biochar. So your slide talks about biosolids to biochar. And you're saying this shining example here that you referenced is for producing syngas, not biochar. So, of course, there's residual biochar that comes out of that gasification facility, but that's not its primary purpose. And as you know, this means that they're going to be running it at a much higher temperature, and they're literally making a different product at that site. So your bright, shiny example to rebut the biosolids, the biochar, and being new and untested, you're actually referencing a facility that's making a very different product than what you're making. So the lessons learned there really do not translate to your own product. From a IT point of view, it's like using the same hardware to run Linux versus Windows. It's a very different experience and a very support plan for those two platforms. And so it just doesn't translate and isn't really a good example.
You know, you're correct, and let me address that. The reason it's very different is it's a different technology. They're using gasification. Gasification was developed actually in Nazi Germany and perfected in South Africa, mainly for taking coal and gasifying it and making liquid products out of it. It has predominantly been used in the power generation sector. Hence, they're trying to get as much gas as they can out of the product. Well, what you do in that situation is you're not going to get nearly as much material out of the process. You're baking it at much higher temperatures, and you're basically reducing the amount of material coming out. Well,
I don't
we
want to
disagree
interrupt,
with
but
that
I just want to
approach.
mention that you just started off by saying it's a very different technology. And
It is.
yet the example you're using is saying that your technology is proven.
Pyrolysis is proven, and pyrolysis has been proven on numerous materials.
Well, that's
That
not
was
what
just
you're
an
using in
example
Logan,
of an
Australia.
attempt to use pyrolytic technology to handle biosolids. There's very few in the world, but that's one of the
I did mention there
examples.
were 5 differences. I'd like to cover the other
Well,
4.
okay, go ahead.
And so Logan, Australia is located next to a wastewater treatment plant, as is every other example that appears on your website. None are actually located in an industrial park. In fact, to my knowledge, there are exactly 0 examples in the United States where this type of facility is located inside of an industrial park. And then third, the reason for the Logan, Australia site to be built in the first place was to remove trucks from the road. They were having 6 trucks per day transporting biosolids to be spread on farms. And so the design goal for that facility was to remove those trucks. In contrast, you're looking to add up to 50 truckloads a day. And so it's the polar opposite of your facility. And so your reference there is really making a different product, and it was built to do precisely the opposite of what you're trying to do here at the town of Monroe's industrial park. And then fourth, as you guys already did mention, it was at least partially government funded. It's not a private for-profit facility. So just from a business point of view, extremely different. And then finally, it's a bioprocessing facility that's receiving its raw material from exactly one supplier, not multiple suppliers like you are. Mm-hmm. And these multiple suppliers, all these other waste treatment plants, they haven't been part of a supply chain previously. So just from the point of view of getting a consistent flow of material into your facility that works the same, appears the same, and stays that way over time, also extremely different. And so I did actually have questions because I was just trying to make those points. The questions I have is that the output of your proposed facility really has 3 major components. It has char, it has syngas, and we've covered those, but it also has tar. And so because you're going to be running at a lower temperature than the Logan, Australia facility, you're going to be producing far more tar than they are. And your solid waste management facility permit does not contain any references to tar, filters, filter cleaning, or the temperature that the reactor or the thermal oxidizer is going to be running at. And so what are your plans for dealing with the tar, the filter cleaning of that tar, And are you going to be running that at a higher temperature in order to clean those filters?
There's no filtration process whatsoever. We burn the tars along with all the other syngas. It's part of the syngas. We don't separate it. The tar has energy, and that is a big energy component within the syngas that we create. Other technologies separate it. Some will even distill it into energy products. Those are different approaches. We take a very simple approach. We take the energy out and we use it for drying. And we remediate the gas completely in the process.
So you have, okay, so just to be clear, you have a zero tar process.
No, there's tar in the syngas. There are tar compounds in the syngas that's created. And that syngas is entirely burned in the advanced thermal oxidizer immediately after it exits the pyrolysis unit.
So do you have a two-stage system where you're burning that at a higher temperature than what you're drying the biosolids at?
Oh yeah, we dry the biosolids at a much lower temperature, yes. Of course. I mean, you'd incinerate them if you put them at the same temperatures. So you dry the biosolids at a much lower temperature. We derate the gas. We basically, our thermal oxidation process starts with a reducing zone, goes through a cooling zone to cool the gas, and then burns it again in 2 different sweeps. And that way we ensure that everything, the whole gas is completely remediated. It's an advanced thermal oxidation process.
Are you able to share the 2 temperatures that you'll be operating at?
1100 degrees on the pyrolysis unit and 2300 degrees in the thermal oxidation unit.
Okay, thank you. One final question. Are you willing to place funds in escrow in the event that the business fails and the site has to be cleaned up?
There's actually a closure bond that's required from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation that we have to have and take out for this project. So yes. It's a bond. It's a closure bond, not an escrow account.
Right. Is there a dollar amount that you can talk about?
I don't have it off the top of my head, but it's determined by the DEC and will be agreed by the DEC to basically remove all the biosolids and everything from the facility and clean it out.
Okay, thank you.
But I do want to address some of your points that you made about our technology in comparison to Logan and gasification. Since you made so many points, I'd like to be able to rebut those points because you basically are not capturing our process. Are you okay with that?
I'm fine with that.
Okay. So with gasification, you get a lot of incomplete combustion, somewhat similar to incinerators. With pyrolysis, again, we have full control over that gas in it. We're separating it completely from the material. In fact, as I said, in the pyrolysis unit, we get 2 outputs, just to correct you. We have a syngas and we have solids. The solids are the carbon, which we cool down and it becomes carbon fertilizer after a few adjustments to it. The syngas is taken in a separate thermal combustion unit, we call it advanced combustion unit, a thermal oxidizer, with a reducing zone. And that helps us even control nitrogen emissions, which are very difficult for gasifiers to control. In fact, that's one of the reasons they can't scale and they can't be as big as us in terms of scalability. Now, the scalability gives us the ability to do things like have an off-site facility. Because most of the facilities, there's a company, Pyreg, out of Germany that has been building really tiny units. Okay, great. But if you scale it, you have issues. The fact that we're actually able to scale it and achieve 15% of the state's biosolids on 5.89 acres of land is a technological marvel. And still be within a state air permit and not even have to worry about a Title V permit. We're not in the federal category. Our emissions are low out of this process. Why? Because with pyrolysis, we achieve a much greater production rate of biochar. We get a lot more carbon out of it. And as I said, that carbon is basically avoided emissions when you compare it to an incinerator.
Is that your 3-minute limit, Russ? Do you know what I mean? We just had Shannon get cut off for going on too long. So if this is our question and comment period, I just think there probably should be a limit.
I'm addressing the points, and he went on for several minutes, more than 3 minutes, so I'm entitled to at least the same amount of time to rebut his.
You're way over.
Okay.
You're way over.
So to be clear, we're going to stop. We're not going to debate. okay? We'll do our best to answer a question if we can, we will. We'll receive the comments. That's what this is for. But if somebody's going to try to cross-examine, turn this into a debate, we're going to end that. Sorry, that's the way it's going to be.
I'm trying to
Okay.
inform you about what we're doing. If you don't
He's
want to
trying to
hear it,
answer
why are you
Mr.
here?
Montrell's question.
It's actually a public
we can stop now. If Martin is happy with the answer where we're at, we'll move on.
Next
I
question.
don't want to cut off the other people in the room or the other participants, so we can wind this down. That's fine.
Thank you.
Okay, we can go to another online one. I've got Bill, you've got your hand up. I'm sending you an unmute request right now.
Yeah, thanks. I have a very simple question. I don't really understand the distinction between an environmental justice and a disadvantaged community designation, but either way, does the fact that your proposed facility is located in close proximity to communities that have been so designated have any practical impact on your permit applications and what you have to establish in those applications, and or maybe more importantly, how the DEC evaluates those applications?
Thank you, Bill. I'd like to ask you to announce where you're from, and then we'll have Andrew from Sterling respond to your question.
Okay, well, assuming Bill will let us know where he's from. So the question about how the EJ or disadvantaged community plays into the permit application process, what has to be demonstrated and what is considered by the DEC as part of the review, and if you go into the CLCPA and you want to read all the text, it's section 7.3, 7(3) of that, which is you have to demonstrate that there's no disproportionate burden on the disadvantaged community, and that there's not a increase in greenhouse gases or co-pollutants in that community. So there's not a number, there's not a limit, there's not a black and white criteria. It's no disproportionate burden. So they take into consideration the comments, they take into consideration the potential impacts of a project, traffic, odor, noise, air emissions, and that all becomes part of the review. But what it does is it takes that review out of just the Moreau Industrial Park. You're not looking just at that location. It expands the review of potential impacts to those communities.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. And I apologize. My name's Bill Heinrich. I live in Glens Falls, and I was having trouble unmuting again.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you, Bill. You want to take another, it's up to you, Rob. One from.
We have an Andrew.
Okay, sure, yep.
Yeah,
Please,
you
yeah.
step up to the mic, sir. While he's making his way to the mic, for those that are calling in on a phone number, you should be able to press *9 to indicate that you want to ask a question.
Hi, my name is Doug Tully. I live in Moreau. All the things that are being talked about here, very sophisticated, and I applaud the folks that are raising these questions, and I appreciate you folks that are doing your best to try to answer them. You kind of got my attention when you said milorganite, because milorganite, if you apply it residentially, your neighbors always know when that's being applied.
When it gets wet.
Yes, they do.
So is
And the
your
deer
product
do, too.
going to have the similar characteristics once unbagged? It's
Not at all.
a lot of odor and
Not
stuff
at all.
like that.
There's a few, I guess the differences between milorganite and what we produce.
Yeah, I'm not looking for the science on that, but if the answer is yes or no, I'll just move on.
I will
to
say
the time.
it's a very different product.
Okay.
And the biggest difference your neighbors will notice is if you use our product and it gets wet or you water your lawn, it's not going to start smelling again.
Okay.
And you're not going to drive away the deer because we've basically, in our process, baked out all the volatile organic compounds, which
Okay, I'll let
Can do that.
I'll let that go. I'll live with that. My big issue, I guess, might have been answered by some of your slides, and I'm here. I'm trying to gain information, and I got a disagreement from the slide about the route of the trucks versus what I read in some of the documentation, and I would just like you to confirm that the route is exit 17, Route 9, 197, and not the Fort Edward Road. You're going further down towards.
It is Fort Edward Road.
Okay.
Left on Fort Edward, right on Bluebird, right on Farnan. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would like for the record to object to that for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's a lot of traffic already because of all the trucks going to another landfill project down the way. I think it's Fitch Pine Products and other things. And there's been accidents at the intersection of Reservoir and Fort Edward Road, fatalities because there's a blind spot there. And if I use the example of the existing trucks going back and forth, they're often at speed, and I think it creates a dangerous situation. And I guess what I'm advocating for, if you're going to use that route, that why wouldn't you take Route 9 to direct Bluebird Road? Then you've got the one right-hand turn straight across to where you have to go. If you do the Fort Edward Road, you have a dangerous intersection when you have to turn left from 197 onto the, that other road. So I'm appealing that the traffic study, if one was ever done, in fact, I don't think one was done. I think that's a legitimate concern, and I wish you would review that.
Could I respond to that?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So we had to go on the traffic study that was provided with the environmental impact statement for the park.
25 years old, right?
It was, I believe, in late 90s, 2001, maybe that time frame, so 20 plus. At the time that traffic study concluded that at full build out of the park with some enhancement at intersections and et cetera and lights that it could handle over 1,200 trucks per hour during peak hours of the day. That seems high to me. I've driven down there, but that's what it says. And we were not required by the town planning board to do an additional traffic study. The highway superintendent looked at it. I have heard from you and many others the concerns. Those concerns resonate with me. I appreciate that. We don't want to cause a traffic problem. And so, but I think the right place to explore that is with the highway department and with the town planning board and the town board to say, okay, this we believe this doesn't work and here's why, and maybe there's a different route that could be established or some additional road enhancement. I don't know what those answers are, but we're complying with the standard that we are held accountable to for the truck route.
I appreciate that, and I hope that this will be part of the final evaluation. Back to the trucks themselves. Your slide also showed an example of a truck. Are they going to be bathtub? In other words, no flip-ups at the bottom. It's strictly so that we're not going to be looking at the drainage from these trucks up and down the road.
They're mesh line sealed end dump trailers.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Correct. With sludge locks on them.
And they can't drip, just so you understand.
They're gasketed.
Yeah, that's part of
and they're
Department of
sealed.
Transportation requirements for those trucks.
And the top is sealed with a heavy tarp.
Okay.
To contain odor.
The other, when you say go back to the town of Moreau, I'm concerned that their process is really all driven by the planning board, and I understand that's the setup. But the planning board has two aggressive advocates for the project, two that are very passive, two that are more defensive, and so these are volunteers. I'm sure properly motivated to do this work, but I'm not sure that they have the expertise to be making the decisions all by themselves for a project with all the complexities that you've brought forth. And to that end, you've referred to these 16 conditions that were decided on in August, and that meeting minutes are still yet to be finalized. They're still in draft form. I tried to retrieve those from Town of Moreau. Not available. Thank goodness you folks have a more complete website. I think this is the 16 conditions.
It is.
And some of those conditions, it says they've all been answered. I'm not sure that answers are spelled out here. So is that something I can find on your website, how you've addressed these?
I want to help, but I'm not sure if I completely understand the question. So you found the site plan approval and the final conditions.
Right, 4-2 vote on August something or another.
25th, yeah.
Yep, and it says attached to that would be the revised conditions that aren't attached because the minutes 9 months later still have not been publicized, or they're there, but it's considered a draft, which I think is unusual. And last point is that, so it's difficult to go back and address some of the things that you're telling me to do through the town, because the town has opted, which I think is disappointing, is to do, they've opted for a lawful tacit approval of your project, which means that they don't have to go on the record and say that they're for or against the project. So I think that's, otherwise I would not have been motivated to come here, raise my heart rate, and offer these comments. But I know you talked about misinformation or whatever. I think sometimes it's just a matter of what isn't out there or what actions haven't been taken that are really causing you folks more problem to get maybe an honorable project in the works. But some things working at cross purposes here.
Okay, what I can offer to do is to personally get you a copy of the final site plan approval with its final conditions.
Okay.
If I can receive maybe at the end here, you can give
I'll
me a
drop that off.
contact email or something. The comment that you made about tacit approval, that is actually a statement that we made, that the planning board, per the town's own code and rules relative to the planning board, have a certain time limit by which they have to either approve or deny, and they missed, they went over the limit. And so at that time, we said, well, take the time that you need, but we're not, we're not prejudiced to our rights relative to the fact that this could already be approved because you've exceeded, basically it says if you exceed the time limit, it's automatically approved. So that's where that came from. But, we sat back and waited for them to finish their process, and then the final approval came through.
Okay.
We did not exercise our right.
No,
Yeah,
I'm not even challenging that you folks haven't. I'm just concerning for the record is that I think I would have preferred the elected officials that can be held more accountable to whatever decisions are made or the output, as opposed to a board-appointed planning committee.
Well, yeah, if I may, just the way municipal structures are set up, the town board is a separate entity from the planning board. They act independently. They might be appointed by the town board, but the planning board is there to enforce the comprehensive plan and the zoning laws, independent of the town board. So the planning board is on the record based on their vote of who voted for the project and who voted against the project as part of the approval, but it is intended in all municipalities to be separate.
I respect the process and I understand it. I read quite a few of the dialogues and exchanges back and forth, and it didn't seem to me that it was all, there was strong advocacy and some folks' followers, and it is a very complex issue, and I just wanted to make sure it got a fair shift, and I'm not sure that happened.
Understood.
Okay.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We've got an online question. Wendy has been waiting patiently. I'm sending you an unmute request right now, Wendy.
I've just been listening in on this issue. I'm involved with the Dunn Construction Demolition landfill in Rensselaer, which is now, their DEC permit is expired. And when that project first started over 10 years ago, or 12 years ago, I think it is, 200 feet from a school and the playground, they didn't realize exactly, some people didn't seem to realize all of what was going to happen, such as toxic levels of sulfur dioxide, diesel fuel from up to 100 giant trucks permitted to go through the city streets and backed up and idling, and kids trying to get on school buses when there's giant backed up trucks, and PFAS now coming out of the landfill, and all the different things that happened. And so you don't always know maybe what something is going to turn into, but I'm thinking about sewage sludge as people, you never know what to do with a paintbrush when you're painting, and some people are still using old paints that have toluene and stuff like that, that's going to end up in the sewer, and different things with PFAS that's going to end up in the sewage sludge. And are you going to be testing every single day for every possible really bad carcinogen and for PFAS every day? I know I heard you say that, and I know that we don't have really good set limits on that yet, but like the morganolite, I can never say it right, but that's got PFAS in it. And, and farms have been ruined by the PFAS, so I'm just kind of trying to sort through this. I happen to live on a truck route to a CD dump in Canaan. It's a transfer station, and the trucks approaching the traffic light out here with the Jake brakes are just deafening. So I'm just wondering, because I just see other communities going through what I'm going through, what Rensselaer's going through, what Cohoes is going through with Norlite, what Queens is going through, all these different communities are going through hell. So I thought I'd just put these questions out there.
Thank you, Wendy. I think I heard two distinct questions. I'd like to have Andrew Millspaugh from Sterling address the first one, and then we can talk a little bit about the second.
Well, I guess first with your examples of other locations, I mean, this is a project of this location with these potential impacts and these processes. So there's parallels in that you have to review each location, but this is a distinctly different project from those. Certainly here the concerns which are similar for projects of traffic, noise, odor, air. But this is being reviewed in the context of this location. And this, this technology, this process. So there's that distinction. Ray, did you have the other question?
Yeah, if you could repeat or just clarify, your second effective question, Wendy, was I think around emissions monitoring and testing. If you could clarify exactly what you're looking for there.
Well, I think now that you mentioned that, yep.
Sorry. Well, I was talking about idling trucks and stuff like that. I was talking about things like toluene and stuff that is in some of the old paints when people are washing paintbrushes and stuff.
Yeah.
And I've always been told if you burn it, you're going to breathe it. And I also was just wondering, what will all that heat from those smokestacks do to affect the temperature in the area?
So the volatile organic compounds you're referring to we consider those kind of the easy ones to break down in our process. The thermal oxidizer will crack those apart easily. The most stubborn are the PFAS compounds. So we're not concerned about the breakdown of VOCs such as those. We will be doing stack and emissions testing. We've discussed this in several different ways in last night's meeting and again today. We need to see what the air emissions permit will require of us, and then we will work with the community representatives to determine if it would be appropriate to do more than is required, or if what's going to be required is adequate. Does that help answer your question? Second question?
Please unmute yourself.
Sorry, I was muted. Well, I'm listening, and I guess you probably won't know really till you start doing it and see what happens, and then you'll know what the reality is. But I'm listening to what you're saying and taking notes. So thank you.
Well,
thank you, Wendy.
You also had a question about the exhaust temperature, and
thanks. That's
we're using a wet scrubber system. So I'm trying to look up the exact figures, like 160 or a couple hundred degrees. So it's really inconsequential to any kind of, what it would have on the climate change around the facility.
I think it's 160.
Yeah, 160, I believe, is the exhaust coming out of the facility.
I don't know if that was clear, Bryce. Could you?
The exhaust temperature of the stack is 160 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's not going to change anything locally. I mean, by the time you look at dispersion and everything, it's not going to have any notable impact on ambient temperatures around the area.
Correct. Thank you, Wendy. Hey, Rob, I see that there's somebody attempting to ask a question via chat because they're unable to speak currently. Could you encourage them to type their question in the chat, and we'll attempt to address that?
Yes, I believe
not
he's
how we're trying to do this.
right
They're
now.
unable to speak.
Okay, it's working.
Yep, I've got his question right now if you want to take that
great.
one. The question is, it's from Concerned Citizen. Pilot studies, that's his username, is Concerned Citizen. If you'd be good enough to type your name in the chat.
And where you're from as well.
And yeah, your location. We can add that in later. Pilot studies have been said to be done by the manufacturer to make the equipment necessary to process the biosolids. What biosolids were used for pilot testing? Was it representative of what is going to be hauled to Moreau? Every municipality has a different biosolid, meaning it has varying percentage of varying chemicals and PFAs depending on what is going through the respective waste stream.
Great, thank you. I'll take that one just quickly. So for our testing, we have used primarily biosolid samples from Cedar Rapids and from the Chicago area, the North Shore Water Reclamation District. We, particularly in the Chicago case, believe that is representative of everything and anything that could possibly be in biosolids currently. It's a major metropolitan area.
Yeah, undigested and digested mixed.
Yeah, and Lee's pointing out that we tested both undigested and digested biosolids mixes. Thank you. Anybody from within the room would like to grab the mic? Anybody that wasn't here last night that wants to have a shot at it first? Anybody that wasn't here last night that hasn't had a chance to speak yet? Right here. So we just like to give the folks that weren't here yesterday to have an opportunity here first.
Hi, my name is Kate Phillips. I'm a senior at Skidmore College studying political science and environmental science and studies. I've been doing extensive research over the past month on your proposed biochar plant, and I'm extremely concerned about it. My first question is, you did a study about breaking up PFAS at the Zion wastewater treatment plant. In your application for the clean air permit, you said that it was 20 minutes long and that you were able to break up 99% of PFAS, except you only managed to break up 72% of PFOAs. And I'm wondering what your methodology was and why you think that a 20-minute study can be scaled up to a 34,100 square foot plant.
Thank you. Great question. We've enhanced the thermal oxidizer capability substantially since the document you're referring to was provided, and we are now operating that. We will be operating that at 2,300 degrees in the first stage, and it's a multi-stage thermal oxidizer. So the concerns about not breaking apart all the PFOAs have been eliminated with that design change.
Let me add to that real quick. The 20 minutes is residency time within the kiln. So it's not a matter of study, it's a matter of how long that material is subjected to high temperatures. And we've also increased the temperature substantially to ensure that we have complete destruction of PFOA.
Okay, I also have a question about your confidence in pyrolysis. I read a variety of EPA briefs about pyrolysis, and in a 2021 technical brief, the EPA said that their research, quote, is not an endorsement or recommendation to use this technology to destroy PFAS, end quote. It also said, quote, there are a number of challenges and data gaps with these technologies, end quote. In a letter to the Moreau Planning Board on May 12th, 2022, you said, quote, Mr. Appy, you said, quote, I'm here to tell you, if you get PFAS in its gaseous state hot enough, it is not a forever chemical anymore. This has been proven. It is not theoretical. I'm wondering why your process and your studies are better than the EPA's and how you came to such strong confidence when some of the best scientists in the United States are not confident that pyrolysis can break down PFAS.
That's a great question, very observant on your part. So particularly, we don't use pyrolysis to destroy PFAS. We use the stage after that, which is thermal oxidation. Pyrolysis allows us the opportunity to separate volatile organic compounds, organofluorines like PFAS, from the solids. That way we're able to export a clean batch of solids continuously out of the pyrolysis chamber and separate out those contaminants that we don't want to exist in the environment into the thermal oxidizer for destruction, which is what I described a moment ago. So it's actually two different things. And the EPA study referencing that pyrolysis is not a suitable way to destroy PFAS is correct for that reason.
And at what temperature is the thermal oxidation going to be at?
2,300 degrees in the first stage and stepping down to the next two stages from there. So the first stage is 2,300 degrees.
Sorry, what do you mean by stepping down?
This is a three-stage thermal oxidizer. So the second stage is a little bit cooler, and the third stage is a little bit cooler. And if you want to get more technical, you got to talk to him. And his answers are really long, so careful what you ask for.
Okay, can I have your technical answer?
The thermal oxidizer is also designed to control and manage nitrogen dioxide emissions and nitrous oxide emissions. So you have temperatures you've got to adhere to for that as well.
Yep.
That's why we do combustion sort of in two phases. First is sort of at a higher temperature, which destroys the PFAS. And it also creates a reducing zone for the nitrogen dioxide compounds so that we can manage those. Then we go through a cooling process, which we could use a lot of water, but instead we've elected to go for a very exotic heat exchanger so we can recapture that heat into our process and be more efficient. And then it goes into a third stage of complete combustion. So that's where what's left is then combusted again at a lower temperature, so you avoid the NOx output from the process. And in that way, we're able to control basically nitrogen dioxide, which is a harmful air emission and is regulated air emission, and probably one of the more difficult ones to control with other methods like gasification.
And I'm wondering, I looked a little bit into all of your backgrounds, and I'm wondering what you feel your qualifications are for making this plant. I know that the two of you did have some issues a few years ago in lawsuits in towns that were a bit concerned about some of the environmental technology or sewage you were using. And I noticed that you've been working at an IT firm for a long time, so it's a bit surprising to see the three of you proposing a biochar plant when you don't seem to have a background in it. So I'm just wondering, kind of how you got into this and what how you can speak to your qualifications for putting this in a residential town.
Sure. Good, great, fair question. So I'll answer for myself and let Lee and Bryce address for themselves. My background educationally is in environmental studies and sciences and engineering. I worked in that field for several years after graduate school, and then I moved into the IT field. I grew my career in the IT field from systems engineer to CEO over the course of 17 years, and was successful in taking over the control of a company and building it from 50 to north of $100 million. So my expertise is more in organizing teams, executing on developing strategies and executing on those strategies. And so what we have done and what I've been leading here in this effort is to bring the best talent that we can find in the United States to bear for the design and planning of the system. So I'm not the engineer designing our pyrolysis kiln or our thermal oxidizer or the overall system. Neither is Lee and neither is Bryce. We've hired some of the best and brightest to work with us on that from the manufacturing industry. And so that's the talent that I believe that I bring to the table to lead an organization and build a company and to make it successful and to ensure that success over a long time.
Are people going to have the option to speak to the people actually designing this technology?
I'm sorry, repeat please.
Will people have the opportunity to speak to the people designing the technology?
We are going to make that available, yes. We've been, that to us is, we've spent a tremendous amount of time. These guys, more than 3 years, me, just over 3 years, about 3 years, and a lot of money to get to this point where we are today. And we've put a tremendous amount of effort into the design and planning, and that effort is coveted by our competitors who are trying to get to the same end goal. So that's considered trade secret by us. We're not able to patent that information. And it's a very high value to us, long-term high value. So we've been protecting that. But we've also recognized that that given the amount of concern raised by the community, that there's a need for more transparency. So last night in the meeting, we actually disclosed manufacturers' names, and we are willing to go a little bit deeper in that at this point.
And then with me, Lee, I was born and raised on a farm. I worked for a guy that I ended up buying the business off of that was in the biosolids. With Cedar Rapids, there was an issue. This was 14 years ago. We had a stockpile permit we had a stockpile situation. Flood of 2008 come through Cedar Rapids and wiped out the incinerator. So there's 80,000 tons of biosolids that we had to deal with on a short notice. Farm fields were planted, so we ended up stockpiling it for application later. The only thing that happened is we didn't have permits to stockpile more than 30 days. It was a technicality in a way, but we ended up dealing with it. We dealt with the odors and got rid of it as fast as possible according to what the DNR instructed me to do. I followed all of them, got it taken care of, never had a complaint after that, and I got 28 years in the biosolids, my whole career.
Did you ever have a complaint or an issue before that?
No, never had a complaint before that in my whole career. There's one complaint in my whole career.
And did you receive any violation from a regulatory authority of any
No
kind?
notice of violations.
Thank you.
Okay. I think Karen and James Ellerbach might have different ideas.
Just to put on record, they had 13 other lawsuits before me. So they're out looking for more than their sickness.
But they were sick.
No, they were not sick. I said they were not sick.
I looked it up, they were sick.
Yeah,
They
well,
said
that's
they-
what they said.
they said-
Again, we're not debating this. I'm telling you exactly what happened.
They said they were sick.
But they also didn't say they had 13 other lawsuits that they litigated
Correct.
on either. So
That's
I don't know how many
that's
you
the
guys-
reality. They're lawsuit happy.
Yes. Myself, I studied political science like you. Graduated of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. After that, I went to Moscow, worked with the World Bank Group, the International Finance Corporation in agriculture and forestry. Being from Kansas, everybody thought I knew agriculture, but that's really where I got into it, is in Russia and Ukraine and Tajikistan and several other countries in the former Soviet Union. Really, I spent a lot of time in Ukraine, ended up moving there. Spent about 5 years in Moscow, moved to Ukraine, spent about 5 years there, and that's where I sort of transitioned into alternative energy. Did some biomass supplies chain studies and I've always been a consultant most of my career, working in and out of different businesses. But I basically did some supply chain studies for power plants, biomass power plants, got into the equipment and understood the industry from that perspective. And when I moved back to the United States, when Ukraine started falling apart in 2013, I moved back just 3 weeks before the whole revolution started in November. I had the opportunity to work with Earth, Energy, and Environment as a consultant. And there, it was sort of a person I admired because he created sort of an advanced ethanol refinery. And ended up working with gasification there. But again, I was more or less a consultant to that company. I was not a decision maker. I was never personally sued. Haven't been personally sued in my life. But I learned a lot. And that's one of the reasons I'm an analyst by nature. I take care of the financial forecasting. I look at every aspect of engineering. I get my hands dirty in every aspect of this business. And I do that for good reason. I've learned you have to know every detail of what you're getting involved in if you're going to risk your career on it.
Great. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kate.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got an online question from Katie DeGroot. I just sent you an unmute request.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
My name is Katie DeGroot. I live in Port Edward, and my question is about the end use of your product. I would like to understand more about where you plan to sell it and who you think the customers are. Because one of the things I learned from running a beef farm is that you just don't you just don't start buying cows until you know where you're going to send them to market. Because otherwise you just end up with a lot of cows on your property. So I would like to understand more about the product that you will be creating and where you're planning to sell it. Thank you.
Yeah, I can take that one. Thank you. That's a good question. So we have been developing over the past year and a half offtake agreements at a distribution level with organizations in the Northeast, and we have established a go-to-market plan that initially involves selling in bulk. So the facility is initially configured to load product in 1 and 2 cubic yard super sacks, which can be forklift loaded onto a flatbed truck and hauled away that way by customers. And we also have the ability to top load an open container type truck at higher volume. And so that initially is our plan. Longer term, we would like to develop and brand a consumer or retail level product where it gets down to 50 pound, 40 pound, 20 pound bags, and find it on the Home Depot and fertilizer store shelves. That's maybe sometime in the future. Maybe we won't ever need to. But the interest that we're receiving initially for the product is coming from horticulturalists and agricultural communities or producers in the Northeast. We receive actually, interestingly, given the amount of attention this project has received over the past 6 months related to the public pushback, and the amount of media coverage has actually greatly enhanced our sales opportunities, because I get contacted frequently, most recently from a 3,000-acre farm in Western New York that's interested in using the product. And also interestingly, some of these folks have been buying and using wood-based biochar as a soil enhancement, and also importing biosolids biochar from out of the country. I have yet to figure out where they're getting it, how it's getting here, or even if that's legal, I don't know. But they're interested in the product. So I hope that answers your question.
I can add a little bit to that. I mean, there's also the USDA Soil Carbon Amendment Program, which we qualify for. That's something farmers, basically, the federal government is more or less subsidizing farmers to start carbonizing their soils. Now, I think that's instrumental in understanding that the federal government has acknowledged we need to do this, and they're willing to subsidize the application of carbon into soils in New York State, and it's being rolled out to the entire country. So I think that does two things. It guarantees a certain market for our product, but it also demonstrates that it's a real issue. That it confirms a lot of the things I've been telling you earlier about how we've been eroding soil carbon and how that's a problem nationally. Now, last but not least, just so you have no concern about us building up carbon fertilizer on our site, in the event we cannot sell it, as part of our agreement with Casella Organics, they will receive the material. And the intended use is to put it into compost to ensure that there's still a beneficial use of this product. Now, what we've seen with biochar and compost is pretty amazing. It helps speed up the compost product and produces a much better compost product. So, we have a limit of how much we can store on our site, and that's 7 days of production. And that's something that's part of our solid waste handling permit with the New York State DEC.
Thank you. Anybody else from in the room here? Yeah.
My name is Mike Dickinson, Fort Edward, New York.
Hey, Mike. Thanks for coming.
Come closer.
Yeah, there you go.
You've invested in negative air pressure ventilation. Yes?
Yes.
That's part of your process? Okay.
Yeah, that's the building design.
What made you determine that was necessary, just so I understand it?
It's actually designed off of a plant in Chicago, Zion, Illinois. That's where we received some of the biosolids for testing. When we went there and looked at it, Bryce and I have been there, they actually have trucks coming in from greater North Chicago. They bring all their waste to this 40-acre site. And through that process, they're dumping inside the building. When them doors open up, you can feel the suction. It sometimes, when they have all three fans going, it'll knock you over because it's sucking that much in. It just depends on what time of day it is. But there has not been one complaint in 10 years of that operation being on with $1 million homes all around it. So that's why we're designing it around that process.
So that ambient air in the building gets pulled in and run through the emissions control system. So we're able to pull, and particularly in the receiving area where the biosolids are brought in and dumped in the in-ground pit, that's obviously the most odorous area of the facility. So that receiving area is particularly important, that we're able to suck all the air in and process that air and deodorize it.
So the doors are open while the trucks are dumping?
Doors are open while they come in, and when they exit only. We close those doors, while they're in, the doors close before they untarp the truck.
Must be high ceilings in this.
It is,
It's 45 foot tall.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's an investment to be able to have that come into the facility.
40-foot dump beds that fully lift inside the building.
Okay. And what's the temperature inside the building?
Well, different
during operation?
Ambient.
It'll vary
It's
depending on
whatever.
the season.
It's ambient. In the wintertime it might be a little cooler because it's sucking the air in from outside, but it'll be above freezing. It'll probably be in the 50 degrees.
And in the summer?
In the summertime, it'll be hotter, but it's going to suck all that air. We're talking 34,000 cubic feet CFM
per line.
So when you got all three lines, that'll be 100,000 CFM. That's a lot of airflow.
And the machines, you have loaders that are loading the product into your process,
Yeah.
right?
No loader. The only loaders we use for loading product is the wood waste, and that's just to get it into the system.
To add to it, yeah.
But the biosolids dump into a retrieving pit that has auger retrievers that will pull it into our system directly. There's no loader. There's no handling, second handling of that biosolids once it's in the pit. It goes straight into our system.
And are there workers inside the facility?
Yes.
And who monitors whether those doors are open and closed? Is that the EPA or is that
The operator.
No, well, it'd be
It's-
us.
DEC? I meant, yeah.
Yeah, it'll be us controlling and operating it when trucks are coming and going.
There's an operator present.
Operators, there will be 2 operators at all time. There'll probably be 4 most of the time. But when the truck comes in, they'll dump. All employees will have monitors on them to check the oxygen because in case H2S gases get out, they'll all have safety equipment on.
Okay.
We have OSHA standards, which we have to abide by as well. On top
Yeah.
of it, there's a lot of regulations involved with this process.
I understand that. We have a soil burning plant in Fort Edward, a couple thousand feet from my home.
Okay.
And they're monitored by the DEC. The doors are open all the time. So how do we know that that's not going to be an issue with your facility?
We don't know what the
Like I
permit
said,
is.
you can hold us accountable to what we say.
Correct. All of our stuff's on record that we're doing.
We're telling you this, and it's part of our permit applications. If it's incorrect, then there's repercussions for us.
Okay. And adding carbon to compost reduces odors as well. You forgot to say that.
Absolutely.
Oh,
It
yeah, it
does.
does.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
It also causes fungus to just sort of go.
Please.
Tom?
Tom Masso from Moreau. Thank you again, gentlemen, for taking a second day. I know this is not easy. I have to address something that came up twice yesterday and it came up again today. And it's not really a reflection on you, but you were wrong about it because you were given this information. It's about the traffic study. And yesterday when I heard 1,200, and I heard it again today, 1,200 trucks an hour, you had a question about that seemed a little bit high. Now, that came from Mr. Meeker, and at first I thought you just misspoke. I thought you moved a decimal point. But honestly, I went through some papers, and I came across a piece of the traffic study. And you're correct. In full build-out, the plan is for 1,265 trucks per hour.
Peak hours, right?
Peak
During
hours,
peak
yes, that's
hours.
correct, thank you. Now, I told you yesterday I'm not a geochemistry expert. I'm not an environmental science expert. But I spent most of my adult life in transportation and distribution. Got an MBA from Syracuse with a concentration in distribution and logistics. I've worked for transportation companies, multimodal companies, logistics companies. I have built and run warehouses in the US, Canada, and Mexico. I know a lot about trucking.
Okay.
So I have some knowledge. And that number 1,200 was the first time I heard it. Made no sense to me.
Me neither.
All right? So now, I'm only saying this because you're 50 loads a day, while there are legitimate issues about noise and odor and safety. Logistically, you can run 50 trucks a day in and out of this facility on these roads. That's a fact.
Mm-hmm.
But you are, in suggesting that the traffic study done 25 years ago or whenever it was done, you're kind of contrasting this 1,200 number with the 50, which is a drop in the bucket. Yes, it is. But there's a problem, and I need to talk about this a little bit. Please bear with me about what 50 loads a day, or excuse me, what 1,200 loads. Not that you'll ever get there. But I think you've got a problem with volume, and it's not at the level of 1,200 loads. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this traffic study. I'm missing the cover pages on it. I don't know who did it. Whoever did it, it was one of the weakest studies I've ever seen. They talk about it in phases. There's an initial phase, I think, where it is right now. You can handle 10 trucks an hour which doesn't put you at risk. I think you're looking at 4 or 5. And I know Hexion doesn't have a lot of trucks going in and out. So what comes next is there's 3 separate phases until you get final build out. And if you look again at this report, you know, what's it going to take, right? Infrastructure that's going to take. Well, there's some signals, Bluebird Road, Fort Edward Road, Route 197, Sisson Road, some turn lanes, some road widening. I have to tell you that whoever did the study never looked at the choke point. The choke point is the plant and the industrial park. You're talking about roughly 62 acres, 1 road going in, lane on either side. If you are going to try to run 1,200 trucks in an hour in there, not that you'll ever get to that, but this is...
We're not.
I know you're not, but this is why the traffic study is flawed, and in my effect, it's not valid. You're going to have a traffic jam all over the town of Moreau. It's impossible under those logistic standpoints. And I'll give you an example where something like that happens, and you'll see the difference is between what is proposed here and what isn't. So just do yourself a little mental exercise. 1,200 trucks an hour is a truck every 3 seconds. You can't, a trucker can't come to a stop at the industrial park and turn in 3 seconds.
I couldn't agree more.
All right, so this traffic study is incredibly flawed and makes no sense. Now, I had to do some research because I thought, you know, is there any place in the country, any facility in the country that's handling a volume of 1,200 units or something close? Anybody been to the Port of Long Beach? No. Yeah, the Port of Long Beach is the busiest port in the U.S. And first off, it's on 3,500 acres, 60 times what the industrial park is. And plus it has related facilities, probably another 3,500 acres of intermodal carriers that are nearby. It has I-410 interstate that comes right in and terminates at the port. So trucks don't have to go through residential communities. They can drive right in, they can drive right out. I-10 connects with I-405. They have a separate short line railroad, Pacific Harbor Lines, that serves the Port of Long Beach, the Port of Los Angeles as well. 2 Class 1 railroads have massive intermodal yards, the BNSF, Burlington Northern Santa Fe, and the Union Pacific. They're building multiple 100-car stack trains. Stack train has double stack containers going out daily. They also have ship-to-ship transfers for coastal barges. The Port of Long Beach is a deep water port. It can handle massive container ships, but there are smaller ports up and down the West Coast that can't handle those container ships, so they transfer to coastal barges as well. Again, if you've ever seen it, it's a magnificent operation. It's like a giant beehive of activity constantly, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. They have massive container gantry cranes. All the containers are barcode scanned in. They have computer tracking of every container, the manifest associated with it, where it came from, where it's going. You've got 1 road here in and out, 1 lane in and out. There are 6 massive gates into the Port of Long Beach, and I'm getting to the payoff here. They have multiple lanes in and multiple lanes out, and they're open 24 hours a day. They've got thousands of employees, billions of dollars invested in equipment, in technology, and in infrastructure in and around it. And their average last year was 1,000 TEUs an hour. That's as close as I can get. Now, a TEU is a 20-foot equivalent unit. It's not technically a truck, but for simplicity's sake, so I don't have to explain TEUs, let's call it a truck. So they're handling that number, that volume, with a massive infrastructure. The 1,200 trucks here, I don't know who did the survey. You can just see somebody started out and they got to it, and it's absolutely, completely invalid. It makes no sense. So, you know, what is realistic? 1,200 is not realistic. Even if you go to 120, you got a problem. I mean, I'm moving the decimal point right now. 120 is a truck every 30 seconds. I don't think that's doable. I think you have to get to about 12 trucks an hour. That's one every 5 minutes. Now, let me tell you why you want a traffic study. And I know you don't think that's true, but why you want an accurate traffic study if you ever get this thing off the ground. And besides, I'm not talking about noise and odors and safety, which are concerns of the community. This should be your concern. I had to drive through the park again on the way here because I went over this data last night, and I had to look at this again. And I went through the park again, and when I had the same impression I had the first time. Be a nice place for a distribution center. So you get started. You're up to your 50 trucks a day. And somebody wants to put a distribution center, an Amazon, a Target, something smaller. And I thought it was a nice facility where you could put a nice little truck terminal. You're now running another 100 trucks off that truck terminal. You're now at 150, and that's going to put your operation at risk. Now, I know Casella's here. I suspect, and he can confirm, operationally, I'm sure you're going to use a drop lot for trucks coming up from Westchester or Long Island or wherever. Drop a load, grab an empty, run back, and you're going to use shuttle drivers, drayage drivers to cycle the loads back to the plant. Am I correct about that? You may not. Okay. Well, I would suggest you do, because when you get a foot of snow up here in the wintertime, you're going to have all kinds of problems getting trucks up I-87. Just a recommendation. So I think you guys need a new traffic study. I think you need to go to the town and say, this traffic study makes no sense. And I think you want one, because if somebody else comes in and they've got a lot of trucks going in and out, it's going to be a problem for you guys to operate. And I just, this traffic study that we've relied on, that the town's relied on, it's hooey. It just makes no sense whatsoever.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it seemed awfully high to me. I've driven those roads many times now too. I didn't see how it could be possible, and I don't have the logistics experience that you do. But so just to be clear, we reference that only because that is the standard that we were given, and we're, as you said yourself, we're a tiny fraction of that. So, and I think you also just said 50 trucks per day is not going to be an issue.
Well, you're running what, 10-hour shift, 12 hours? 12 hours. So. Yeah. 50 trucks, you're running, 3 to 4 trucks an hour. Yeah. That should not be a problem with Hexion, but it could be a problem depending on if that park bills out.
I agree.
And what I'm saying is the odds and ends that the consultant, there are consultants and they're consultants. You have a very good one. But whoever did this work, I think they collected a paycheck and they didn't really look into it, because the choke point is the industrial park, and they never looked at that.
May I ask you a question in return?
Yeah, sure.
Do you feel that the appropriate time for that traffic study is now, or when the next applicant comes in and wants to have a lot more trucks, that revised traffic study?
Whenever, the sooner you get it done, I get a real one done, then the more. Guys, I'm still not sold on you being here, but I'm telling you, if you want to operate long term and not run into a problem because somebody's got a 40 dock truck terminal and they're going to run a cross stock and they're going to kill your operation, because I guarantee you Monday morning there's going to be 20, 30 trucks lined up into the park. Your guys are going to not be able to come in. You're going to have operating guys. You're not going to be able to start your process. You're going to be sitting around drinking coffee. You don't want that. And this traffic study is just, it's terrible. I bring that up, and then I have one other point.
I would like to thank you for that, though, because that's actually really helpful to actually really think about what that impact could be when a larger applicant comes in and we're already operating, and what the pinch that could put on us. I appreciate that. That's helpful. I'll take that under consideration, serious consideration.
Yeah.
Now, I have something else, and I didn't really want to bring this up, but I heard it again this morning. I'm not going to get into the details. I urge everybody here to read the story in the Glens Falls Post-Star dated Sunday, December 18th, the cleanup crew. It deals with all the issues about the history of the principles of biochar, and I'm not going to get into it beyond that. It was written by Haley Colombo, but I do have to say this. Mr. Meeker had some criticism about the person in Columbus, Ohio, who wrote the stories. That would be Haley Colombo. I don't know if you know who she is, but you should. She works for Lee Enterprises. Lee Enterprises is a holding group for hundreds of newspapers around the country, including the Glens Falls Post-Star, including newspapers in Nebraska and Iowa. She basically, the story on the cleanup crew, she used archive stories from the papers that Lee Enterprises owned. And in everything she's written about this, she's gone hand in hand with Jana DiCamilla, who writes for the Post-Star here in town. In fact, they have some stories that are bylined by both of them. So she's not some strange person in Columbus, Ohio. She is connected through the Post-Star to our community.
Okay. We understand that. We know who she is and what Lee Enterprises is. It just seems like she's had an agenda to kill this project. That's all.
Well, I will say this.
Again, we won't get into it either, but it seems like there's an agenda there.
Well,
we're not really sure why, but it's disheartening, and I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I mean, and there's been a lot of misinformation coming from the Post-Star. For instance, they say we're emitting sulfuric acid. It's actually something we use and purchase on the market. I mean, there's no fact checking, quite frankly.
Again, I urge everybody to read the story and make up your own mind.
I'd also encourage you to look at who owns Lee Enterprises as well.
I'm sorry, was it you
Look at
urging?
who owns Lee Enterprises as well. Okay.
I have no idea what that means, but okay.
I mean, they're in Texas, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Montana, New York. I mean, she's writing on all these different areas. So
that's her job.
I agree, but it's not your.
You guys are from the Midwest, right?
I am.
Well, should I be objecting to the fact that two guys from the Midwest want to put a plant in my community? I mean, Mr. Appy at least owns a home here, although I know you had it on the market for a long time. You guys are from the Midwest. Why? I mean, you're objecting to Haley Colombo because she's got interests around the country. Why are you here? Why not? Why? What happened? I mean, why are you here? You're from the Midwest.
Why am I here? I'm here because New York has the greatest problem.
Okay, so Haley Colombo.
The biosolids tip fees are approximately 3 times higher than they are.
It feels like this was a productive exchange, and I think you'd agree it's becoming unproductive.
I agree, but I don't think where Ms. Colombo resides has anything to do with the story. And I think people should read it. That's my
Thank you. Tracy?
So I will not repeat anything I said yesterday. Tracy Frisch.
Put the mic down a bit.
Sure.
There you go.
Tracy Frisch, Town of Argyle, Chair of Clean Air Action Network of Glens Falls. So I have one or two questions I want to ask you, but, well, I'm going to start with a question. When has DEC ever shut down a facility? Norlite in Cohoes and the Dunn landfill in Rensselaer, the one next to the school that was referenced by someone who called on Zoom, they have not been shut down, and they have been incredibly problematic on many levels. My whole communities are up in arms. I just am not aware of any facilities that DEC has ever shut down. So I would encourage you to stop saying that, because it is very unlikely that a facility would ever be shut down unless it exploded or some other big disaster occurred. I want to also state I've been involved with the organic farming movement for 40 years, and I'm not exaggerating. And sewage sludge in any form, at least as a fertilizer applied to land, has been banned under the National Organic Program. Some of us from the Albany area traveled to Rutgers in New Jersey for a hearing in the 90s. There were hundreds, thousands of people there to demand that the National Organic Program not allow sewage sludge, food irradiation, or there was one other, or genetic engineering. And so it's not clear to me that your biochar would be allowed on organic farms.
I would agree.
We're not
I don't think
claiming
we
it's
ever
organic
claimed that.
fertilizer.
Okay.
But let me add this, never before has anybody able to take all the contaminants out of it.
Okay.
And so those contaminants obviously are not organic, which prevents it from being called an organic fertilizer.
Okay. So now I want to reference the EPA Inspector General's report from 2018. I don't have the exact title in my head, but it's something like hundreds of unregulated chemicals or pollutants, hundreds of unregulated pollutants and unregulated and unassessed pollutants in biosolids. And it's about land application, but it has relevance because if you take pollutants and you introduce them to your pyrolysis unit and you thermally oxidize the syngases, you still have these pollutants. I mean, you still have to demonstrate that these pollutants are destroyed. And so my next question is what testing will either Casella do or require that the wastewater treatment plants have done, whether by a state agency or by an independent contractor, sending it to a lab and having it tested. What pollutants, what contaminants will be tested for? And I'm well aware that in New York there is no requirement, and in most states there's no requirement that PFAS be tested for in sewage sludge or biosolids, whatever you want to call it. The only thing, as you mentioned, that needs to be tested under federal regulations, because the state has no specific regulations, is the 9 heavy metals, which include cadmium, lead, copper, zinc, etc. So, yeah, that's my question. I don't know if Casella would be the best entity to answer that, or if you would answer that, because you're saying that Casella will check, before they bring stuff in, and that you will vet the biosolids before they're put into before the truck is unloaded.
I will direct this question to Patrick Ellis from Casella Organics.
Great. Thank you very much. I've been wanting this answer for a long time.
So just in response to the question around testing, Casella, unlike a lot of companies, we manage municipal biosolids to many different outlets, and as a result, we have to do a lot of testing to maintain compliance to be received at a lot of different facilities. That includes sewage sludge incinerators, landfills, compost facilities, lime pasteurization facilities, things of that sort. So the net result is that although the New York state regulations may require a smaller list of compounds to be tested for, Casella will actually have a fairly comprehensive list of things that we have to test for. So that does include those heavy metals that you mentioned. It'll also include pesticides, herbicides, PCBs, VOCs, SVOCs. Casella has our own internal policy that any biosolid that we intend to recycle, which through the Saratoga Biochar facility would be recycling, that we pre-screen that for PFAS as well. So PFAS testing of the most commonly reviewed compounds would be included in that list as well.
Would you be able to provide that list? I'll be happy to give you my email.
The list of everything that we test for?
Yeah.
Sure.
That would be great.
Yep.
And actually, if you have particular standards.
Sure.
Yeah, no, that would be great. I will walk up to you. And then
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you.
Can I just finish? One other thing. When I haven't looked at it lately, but in I believe it was it was one of your permit applications. I haven't looked at this for at least a month. I thought I saw, and I keep on meaning to go back to it, that there was a higher concentration of heavy metals, of these metals, in the biochar than there was in the biosolids. Is that correct?
Well, yes, we're
They do get
condensing it.
concentrated,
Yeah, we're
yes.
condensing it.
Okay.
We take out all the liquids, which are 70 to 80%.
Sure.
And then then we get to a dried state, and then it's further condensed
Okay.
from there, about
40%.
But for
Okay.
clarification, there's not any metals even close to the standard.
Well, let me, I have consulted with a Cornell soil scientist who is a metals specialist. He retired last summer, but when I sent him the results from the Glens Falls wastewater treatment plant 2 years ago, before I had ever heard of you guys, because there was another possible project being considered, I got the test results. Probably I foiled 3 or 4 times because I got 5 tests. And on one of them, this was kind of interesting, the soil scientist said, do you see on the back it says, references a PCB test? I could never get that test from Glens Falls wastewater treatment plant. But when I gave him this information, he wrote a few paragraphs and he said, the levels are all over the map, first of all. They're not consistent because it varies. There was a lot of variance, which is why he asked me to get multiple test results. But he said these have, the levels of X, like my cadmium, have agronomic implications. Mm-hmm. This one has implications for livestock and for humans eating any crops grown. These these things, like PFAS, accumulate in the soil and they're persistent. And so if you apply multiple times, and the same thing I would imagine. Biochar is a peculiar thing because on the one hand, it's said that because biochar stores a lot of nutrients, that it makes them available to plants. And so you can't really argue that biochar slowly makes nutrients available to plants as needed, but doesn't let go of the hazardous constituents, such as heavy metals.
That's correct.
Heavy metals, in fact, will substitute for nutrients.
Correct. They're also used for micronutrients, but I want to back
okay,
up.
Good.
So on the 503 regs that the EPA has stated, those results are, so if you do land application of biosolids every year for 360 years in a row, that's what the standards are going off of for land application. So it's over 360 years is what they're saying. So like molybdenum, I think it's at 75 milligrams per kilogram. We're not even close to that. I don't know what the exact number is on our analysis, but that's the statement that you can apply 75 milligrams per kilogram per year for 360 years before you even get over the saturation.
Well, I'll tell you, the soil scientist at Cornell disputed that in terms of what he wrote, and I'm happy to share with you what I don't have it with me, but
yeah. Well, I was just trying to give you a clarification on how the 503 metals are.
Those are how the limits were formed. Okay.
Correct. The limits.
So, but operationally too, and the question was asked earlier, why don't we just put this next to a wastewater treatment plant and have just one source? Okay.
Yes.
Well, having a facility that takes it in from several plants gives us a lot of operational control over managing spikes. Let's say if there's a spike in copper, or there's a spike in zinc or something, or any kind of heavy metal. We can average it out by having multiple facilities come into one thing. Also, we use wood. That also is kind of a bit of a dilution to make sure that concentrations don't get too high. I mean, we're about 20% on a dry matter basis wood in our system. Okay. So that also is a dilutionary aspect. So we do these things to be compliant with 503 because each of these wastewater treatment plants have to test for these materials and these metals, and we receive those tests, we screen them, say, do we want to receive from this facility or not? And then we, on our back end, are tested for these materials, and we have to basically make sure our product conforms with excellent quality, class A biosolids. And the metals are really the only concern with that, because we already hit pathogen and vector risk reductions in the first stage, the drying stage.
The metals are the concern because that's the only thing currently regulated.
Well, we watch it.
I just want to say one other thing. Yeah. If you're land applying, like you were, then you're subject to the testing.
The treatment plants have to give out the analysis.
Let me just finish. If an individual, if a farmer, gardener, or anyone else buys biochar, buys a sewage sludge fertilizer or compost, then whatever's applied by the consumer is not tested. They could dump
No, you're wrong there. You're absolutely wrong.
We have to test everything coming out of our facility.
And Milorganite has to do the same thing.
Correct.
Okay, but
They have to test, and it's relative to how much they produce. The frequency of testing is determined by volume.
Okay, how often would you have to test it, and who's the regulator for
We
this?
haven't received our permits yet, but we
EPA
do have.
503.
Correct, EPA 503 is the one that would be.
Okay.
And we're subject
And maybe Patrick would like to
Okay, but let me just
add to this.
make one last comment. That is only for at this point, PFAS in sewage, in these fertilizers is not regulated in New York. It is
I would refer to Patrick on that because
Okay.
he knows New York law.
Okay.
Or New York
Yeah,
biosolids.
maybe I'll learn something that is contrary to what I've learned from talking to the.
Well, I just want to make sure we're getting the right information.
Sure,
I'm
no,
not
I've
trying to
been
make anything up.
Yeah, no,
rather.
I've just been talking to the regulators for like several years.
So it is accurate that under current New York state law and EPA rules, that PFAS testing is not required, but that is true of all products. So notably, we went through a process to evaluate some of our competitors' products. We took a look at several certified for organic growing products, food waste composts, products like Hollytone, things that you find at a lot of garden centers that are approved for organic growing, and they contain PFAS. They contain PFAS because PFAS is everywhere. It's in our houses, it's in our clothes, it's in our food. It's pretty frustrating, but that's the reality. So I won't speak to what Saratoga Biochar's plans for testing the product beyond what is required by the state, but I think we need to acknowledge that PFAS is all around us, including in those products that don't contain biosolids.
Well, PFAS is a selling point for our technology to utilities. So we will
Excuse
be.
me, I didn't hear you.
PFAS remediation capacity in our facility, by the way, we're going to be regulated for it under the DC permits. It's in our application. You should understand that.
Yeah,
we're
we
the
did-
first
we
to
did
be
tell them.
regulated for this, the very first.
Well, the application isn't out,
Okay,
so it's.
so let's just say that we're the first. And it's also a very powerful selling tool for us selling this technology to other utilities to say that we get all the PFAS out of it because everybody else has the same concern.
Yes, and as others have said, I'm very interested in seeing the data. And PFAS is in toilet paper. Yesterday at a webinar before on fluorination of plastics and PFAS in plastics, I asked a question and I learned the reason why PFAS is in toilet paper and many paper products. And that's because the pulping machines are lubricated with PFAS. PFAS is a manufacturing aid. They use the faculty member, Graham Peasley at Notre Dame, who led this webinar, stated that he consulted with a Scandinavian paper mill, and they didn't know where the PFAS was coming from. And then he learned they were using a pound of PFAS lubricant for the entire piece of $1 million equipment. And that's where it comes from. So it's a problem. I want to just say one more thing. You are not the source of PFAS. The wastewater treatment plants are not the source of PFAS. PFAS is a much larger problem. And, and we've got to address the root causes. But we also have to be careful not to be spreading it in any way.
Well, Tracy, I couldn't agree more, and I admire your energy and your dedication to this topic over so much time. And I wish I could ask of you to dedicate some of that energy to the manufacturing industry that uses it and the industry that creates it, because ultimately that's where it needs to stop.
Well, I'm involved in that.
Good.
That's good.
Yeah,
That'll make our job easier.
Listen,
and I would love to get it out of plastic for food grade plastics. I mean, that is insane.
Absolutely.
But
It's
the
insane.
problem is not so much in the food. It is a problem in food and other raw ingredients that are stored and shipped in this. But it's also a problem in landfills, and thus in our wastewater treatment plant, because where does the leachate go? Untreated leachate from landfills is sent to wastewater treatment plants, where it greatly increases the levels of PFAS.
Yeah, PFAS is literally everywhere. I mean, it's in furniture, it's in firefighting foam.
But
it's
I
everything.
think I hate when people make that statement because it suggests that we might as well give up, and some people are taking that.
We're the opposite. We're the
not
ones
giving
taking care of it. We're
we
trying
have
to
to stop
destroy
it at the source, because remediation
I agree. And I got to applaud 3M and just so you understand the enormous profits that these companies get. I mean, 3M is recently announced that they're going to stop producing it. $3 billion. They're taking a hit of $3 billion stopping to produce this stuff.
Yes.
Now, that's a lot of PFAS.
Yes.
But it's insane that the others aren't doing it.
Well, DuPont spun off its PFAS division as Chemours or Chemours.
It's,
Yeah, so
well,
they're not going
I'm a critic of it, and quite frankly, I mean, we are trying to hit the most strict regulations nationally for under the CLCPA here. I mean, that's part of our strategy. I mean, we want to demonstrate we're a low emission technology and we're taking care of a lot of these problems. I mean, that's again goes back to
We have a remote caller that's been waiting.
Okay, we've got a phone caller. Last four of the phone number is 7053. I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself, but I believe you'll need to hit *6 to do that.
And please state your name and where you're from.
Barbara Baker. I live in the town of Moreau. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Loud and clear.
Okay. All right. I guess first of all, I need to thank you for your presentation. I do feel it was a bit slick. I think you certainly have been studied and are able to be great salespeople. I'm wondering, and I'm just wondering, I don't have to answer it. I'm wondering what other communities you have given this pitch to. But I think one of the things I'm feeling through all this is that this is not operational now. This is still all in theory. And it sounds like you're looking for the town of Moreau to be the guinea pig for your operation. And I think we need to worry about the unforeseeable consequences of something that's just theoretical at this point. I understand that it's been studied and studied, but until it's operational, you really don't know what's going to be happening. I know I can feel that you really want this to work because it's obvious that your business is going to expand immensely if this is something that is proven true. But I think one of the things that I see in print and I'm hearing from other people is that we want to screech, not Moreau. We do not want to be the guinea pig for your operation. And I probably just need some of your response, but I think I just wanted to make the statement and be able to scream as loud as we are all trying to scream, not Moreau. Do not let us be the guinea pig for your operation.
Thank you for the input. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
We have a participant here in the room that would like to speak, I think.
Sir?
No? Oh, I thought you had a hand up. Yep.
Yeah, he did.
Okay. And then I know you had a question for Casella, Patrick Casella. Yep. Okay, we'll do that next, okay? Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you for your time. My name is Harry Gathile. I'm from South Glens Falls. I'm a former town supervisor, former mayor of the village of South Glens Falls, and chair of the county board of supervisors before I retired twice. But anyway, I'm going to try and be brief, but I'm disappointed, and I think the planning board was misguided on advice that they got not to have a third-party consultant. I think anybody here realizes the complexity of the situation, and I wouldn't expect the volunteer members of the planning board to have the expertise to do all this on their own without an independent consultant. So I think they were misadvised at their meetings, and I think they still, I question the secret process because of that, and we'll see what the outcome of the litigation that the Clean Action has started is done. Another thing is they put themselves in a position to make their decisions to be very dependent upon DEC. and DEC, their air quality divisions, are generally underfunded and understaffed. So when it comes to monitoring and shutting somebody down and getting a quick response, I can almost bet money that it won't be there. So I feel that hopefully DEC and the state legislature realizes this, because these things are so important to small communities. PFAS, I don't know a lot about it, but right now we have contracts that we're probably going to be in the range of $1.8 million because of low-level PFAS. We don't know where it came from. Wish we could prove it in our water. We're putting in granulated activated carbon filtration now. So, but I do want to say I'm not here in any official capacity. I'm just here with my own concerns. And I'm going to leave more concerned than I was before I even came. So, thank you.
Thank you. Patrick, I think you have a question coming your way.
Melanie Dickinson, Fort Edward. Question:
Please speak in the mic.
How much does it cost for all this testing to be done? Like all the tests that would need to be done?
So the general expense of sampling a sludge source for all those different compounds, which, as was mentioned, depending upon the use, the frequency may vary. So the beneficial use, that total heavy metals testing, that's going to be based upon the size of the facility. So a bigger facility may require up to monthly testing. Landfill testing is typically an annual test to assess whether or not the material is a hazardous waste, which the landfills can't take. So if you look at all of those, the landfill testing with the VOCs, the pesticides, the herbicides, the PCBs, the heavy metal testing, it's relatively inexpensive. It's about $200, $250 a test. I'm going off memory. I'm not the compliance guy, but
it sounds about right.
Yeah. The kind of battery of what's called T-clip testing, that's what can leach out of a material. That's what landfills care about. They don't want bad things leaching out. So that T-clip on the VOCs, SVOCs, things of that sort, I think that's about $2,000 for that test.
So that should be done in the trucks that come in every time, because it could be in these trucks.
No, I think it just as not every product you buy has been tested. Testing is done based upon the idea that it's a continuous flow, that generally speaking, the nature of the material doesn't change. And so that periodic testing is representative. Certainly we see with PFAS testing as an example, what we see is actually over time, we're seeing PFAS levels declining in biosolids because the big ones, PFOA and PFOS, are no longer allowed to be used in products. And we're seeing that immediate result in the biosolids, that if it's not in products, it's not going to people's homes. And if it's on people's homes, it's not ending up at the wastewater treatment plant. So, so no, I think as with anything, it's not possible to test every molecule of anything in any process. What is important is that you do testing that is representative on the material so that you can characterize it. Part of our program is we have the generators sign a what's called a solid waste characterization form, which essentially it is asking them to confirm that the sample that was collected is representative, that they had a sampling plan so that they weren't using contaminated collection equipment, things of that sort, so that they know that the test results are representative of the material.
Okay, I guess my concern is that there's not going to be enough testing, and there's going to be a lot of stuff that's going to fall through the cracks. I would never use a product like this. I'm 100% organic as can be. Everything I know is not 100% organic, but I would never use a product like this near my property. I don't even want it in the same town that I live in. and I am a neighbor of it, and I gotta tell you, I'm very, very against it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry, we have a gentleman in the back that I don't think we heard from yesterday. Please.
I'm Frank Santoro. I'm from Moreau. And where I live in Moreau is just about that intersection of 197 and Fort Edward Road. Your truck drivers are not going to want to climb that hill in the wintertime. It's just too steep. It also adds like 3 miles, your route from exit 17 to the plant. It's extra miles. You should do like that man said, 9 to Bluebird. It's a straight route. Also,
Yeah, the problem with that is the school, and that has weight restrictions and truck restrictions on that route that the town has established, so it can't be used unless the town changes their laws.
all right, I was going to say the drivers aren't going to want to turn on Bluebird from Fort Edward Road. They're going to have a hard time making that turn. I'm just saying you should rethink that route. The other thing is I used to live in Glens Falls on Warren Street, a couple blocks from the waste treatment plant. When they didn't burn on the weekends, there was a god-awful stench I had to put up with. Can you guarantee me there's no odor coming from your plant that I have to put up with?
Yes.
You will not smell our facility.
We'll guarantee that. We are doing everything on the odor, just like Chicago. They have no smell coming out of that stack. And we are even over and above what they have.
That's good to hear.
On air emissions.
I don't want to live through that again.
No, we guarantee you there will not be a stench coming out of it.
I'm like downwind from it. I don't want to hear it.
I deal with it every day of my life. I don't want to smell it when I'm off either. So I get I don't want to smell it in my house either is what I'm getting at. So.
All right. Well, thank you. That's it. But please reconsider your route.
All right, Frank.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Got one more online.
Therese, yeah, well, I think George had a comment. He was here last night, but he didn't speak. Therese, can you give him a moment? Yeah.
We have one online, right?
We got one.
They've been waiting.
George, may I ask you to just pause for a second and come up and sit down? There's been apparently somebody that Rob had queued up online that's been, I just they've been waiting. I'm sorry.
Sandy, I've got you queued up. If you would just state your name, where you're from.
Hi, my name is Sandy Mahoney, and I'm from the town of Moreau. Thank you for doing these sessions. I think it's given a lot of people more information and also more questions. So one of my questions, I listened last night and today, is I've heard conflicting answers in the sense of what is actually getting rid of the PFAs and PFOAs. Some people are up on your panel are saying the pyrolysis portion, some are saying the thermal oxidation. So can you just clarify that piece so that we know exactly what you're saying?
Yes,
we will.
We have said here today several times, the PFAS is not remediated in the pyrolysis section of our process. It's a step that separates the PFAS and other volatile organic compounds from the solids into a gas form that is thereafter destroyed in the thermal oxidation process. So the method of destruction of PFOA and PFAS products, along with all the other volatile organic compounds in the material, and that's an extensive list. As we've said, hundreds of compounds here really are fit into that. I mean, from microplastics to hormones to pharmaceuticals, and there's a very long list of volatile organic compounds in the material. They are all remediated in the thermal oxidizer. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. My second thing is with the gentleman that talked about the traffic study. I spoke at the planning board meeting in reference to the same issue. Going into the industrial park, and I know it's not your problem, but I think it's a concern that you need to think about, is one way in and one way out. And if in fact you have those trucks that are coming in, so many an hour, I think you really need to look at that safety, because those roads definitely have a lot of houses out there. Our road is used as a cutoff, even though it doesn't have the weight limit requirement that it's supposed to. and they're sharp turns. So I think those are really important issues that you guys need to think about. I've followed these vehicles down the Northway. Every day that I pass them on the road, those tarps are not secure. So those are all concerns about the neighborhood too.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Sandy.
you.
George, you're up. Thanks for waiting.
Thank you. My name is George Padron. I live in the town of Moreau. Ray, as you know, I'm probably one of the closest neighbors to the facility that's being proposed.
The closest.
The closest,
right
thank you. And I do have a copy of your good neighbor policy. I did read the 16 points or conditions of the town of Moreau. I guess agreed, or you agreed to with them as part of the finalized plan. The three questions I had are as follows, because they really are questions. I'm not here to say or state opinions or anything like that. I just had questions that just I think of and how it affects me and my family and, of course, the greater community. Will all of these items that are contained in your good neighbor policy, or perhaps even in the approval, the 16 conditions, are all of those things part of anything enforceable with the DEC as part of the permit?
There is some overlap. So, I mean, relative to emissions testing, continuous monitoring, those sorts of things, there is definitely overlap, which was surprising to me. But, you know, we didn't so much agree to it, but we're handed, here's your conditions. If you want to do this, you got to comply. Okay, that's fine. That's what we'll do. I will say this, that whether you believe in them or not, the Moreau town has a zoning enforcement officer and a building inspector.
Okay.
And so the process that we're in, and we've just begun with them now, is to complete the building permit application requirements that are contained, some of which are contained in those 16 conditions, and then to work on and come up with a plan with the zoning enforcement and building inspector to help the town basically enforce them upon us. And Andrew was privy to that meeting, and rather than me sit here and tell you what direction that's going, do you have any insight? You could, sorry to put you on the spot.
Well, yeah, I can give insight in terms of overlap with DEC. So some of the things that are in the good neighbor policy and in the conditions related to noise and odor, those are enforceable permit conditions that will be in the DEC permit. Noise, there will be noise monitoring requirements. There will be odor and response requirements in there. So there is overlap in that sense. Part of the discussion with the town as for the conditions specifically, one being, you know, continuous monitoring at the perimeter of the parcel of odors and noise. So we've started exploring the vendors who supply those types of real-time monitoring equipment for doing that monitoring, which would be for odor compounds and noise.
Sure.
So that is, you know, that is in the works. So it is, you know, those aren't just conditions on paper, they are being worked through.
Okay, thank you. The other question had to do with succession. Is there a succession plan? And if so, will what you spoke about, Mr. Millspaw, be a part of that plan? Whoever takes over or maybe assumes operation of the plant, that may be because someone leaves or, you know, sells a share or just goes somewhere else and does something else. I mean, those things do happen over time, and you know, you have a facility that's designed to run 30 years, and so, you know, we all want to be here, right? 30 years, right? But there may be some changes, and so that's why I asked the question.
Okay.
Well, in terms of the permit, yeah, if there was a new entity that would have to be transferred, but everything that's in the permit, you're transferring that permit, so all the requirements, those don't change. Those carry with the permit. The conditions with the site plan, they carry with the site plan. So in terms of business transition plans, that's a question for the, you know, Saratoga Biochar and what their vision is and how they're going to operate it. But those approvals and those conditions, they run with the land, they run with the approval, they run with the permit. So those are transferable among whoever ends up operating the plant.
Okay. And transferable in whole or in part, or agreed, or how does that work, if you know?
In whole.
In whole.
In whole.
I think it'd be.
Okay. Thank you, Ray.
Yep.
And the last question has to do with economics of trucking versus rail. One of the things that I read online was that the Moreau Industrial Park was at one point served by a rail line or a rail spur.
There's a spur in there, yeah.
Yeah, and so thinking about the trucks, because that came up today and yesterday, and there's a cost to that. Would it be cheaper to do anything via rail? Would that be something that would help the operation in terms of the economies there, or trucking is the final solution?
I've thought about that quite a
It's
bit. I
possible.
think it'll take, I mean, the life of our facility is 30 years. I suspect it'll take 30 years to figure out how to get that rail spur operation. It's been a while. But no, on a serious note, though, exporting clean biochar carbon fertilizer product would be relatively easy to move to rail cars and haul out. Bringing biosolids into the facility by rail car would create all kinds of logistical problems for us because we'd have to handle it outside. You got to get it out of the rail cars, into the building, into the pit. The building's not designed to receive it that way. It's received and designed by truck. So I don't see that really possibly happening.
Okay.
As much as it would be nice if the rail were already there, we would have set the facility up to be able to receive it that way, but it's not, and to change it would be probably impossible from a financial standpoint. It just wouldn't make any sense.
That, and given the rail and how it works, it'd be very difficult to manage the rail.
So there's other nightmares. It's like a Pandora's
It's a
box.
monopolized
Yeah.
industry, quite frankly, and it's very difficult to deal with rail companies.
Okay.
So that there's a lot of different issues you've got to tackle with that. So we prefer just to continue with trucks.
Perfect. All right, and in closing, thank you again for having this discussion in this format. The first time in December, the online version, I think, because I attended that one as well online. I didn't speak, but I did suggest, or I did have an email, which was answered online. But I think this type of a format, you heard a little bit more, you got to see a little bit more. And so the concerns are still there, but at least it gave an opportunity for all of us to hear and come at least to see in person if we had the opportunity. So thank you for that as well.
No, thank you
You're
for coming.
welcome.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Please, Bridget Martin.
My name is Bridget Martin. I live in the village of South Glens Falls, which is located in the town of Moreau. I wanted to thank you for coming to the town of Moreau with this project. My number one concern with the town of Moreau is jobs. A lot of these people are retired. They don't have children in the school system. They don't have people who are going to be our children that are looking for jobs when they get out of school. The industrial park is an investment that the town of Moreau has been making for a number of years and has been left vacant. So I appreciate you people coming to the town with cutting-edge technology that's going to clean up the environment, clean up crap that the county and the state has a problem with. I apologize for the way that you've been treated in our town and by people that don't live in our town, aren't involved with our town, could care less if there's jobs in our town. And when I hear people say that nobody wants this project, I guess they forgot about the union guys who want the project. I guess they forget about all the other businesses that are going to benefit from the project. These are good paying jobs. The only other good paying employer that we have in the town of Moreau is the school district. So if your kid doesn't want to become a teacher or serve food to the kids or drive the bus for the kids, we need other opportunities. I want my child to have a reason to come back to the town of Moreau. And the leadership that we have in there now is finally getting stuff done. And I am proud of that. I'm disgusted by the not Moreau crowd, the not in my backyard crowd. It's gonna smell all the lies that they've brought, saying that they're doing it in the public's best interest. Nobody has had the public's best interests at heart coming up here. They've all had their own personal agendas and with their lies and innuendos. I mean, to think that somebody knocked on someone's door and said, if you don't sign this petition, your kid's gonna die of cancer is disgusting and it's wrong. So my question is to you, when are you guys gonna open? I love Saratoga Biochar. I can go buy biochar at Lowe's and Home Depot today. I want it. I'm a gardener. I'm a master gardener. I work for a lawn and garden distributor. This is a good project. It is environmentally friendly. It's good for the town, it's good for the county, and it's good for people who own farms. Nothing's gonna be spread on it except biochar that literally cleans the air, filters the soil, and helps with drought conditions. We are facing the impacts of climate change. This product is going to be needed and used by every single farmer that's out there. And the people with the trucks, I travel down Route 32 every single day behind solid waste trucks. I can't smell it. You wouldn't even know it's that. So that stuff's going on right now. And to hear people, we got so many scientists in town that are going to rewrite the science projects that you did. They're so smart, they're going to rewrite the traffic studies. They know about trucking and rail. All I want to know is, when are you going to start digging? You've already gotten planning board approval. GE is the reason why New York State has the toughest environmental laws out there. You guys are not only meeting them, you're exceeding them. So when are you guys going to open up? I can't wait. Thank you very much. Thank you, Biochar. So guess that's my question. When are you guys going to open up? And how many applications have you gotten from people who are looking for jobs already?
We actually got
How many of them came from the cement factory that's closing down? How many of these people are lying to you saying that they're for the environment but fought the sewer project? Right now we have failed septic systems in our town that are leaching through the sand to the river, and these fake and phony people tell you they're for the environment. When are you going to open? Thank you very much. Welcome to Moreau.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bridget.
Thank you, Bridget. Martin, I appreciate that. We have received 17 inquiries, I'll refer to as applicants for jobs to date. Most are from the greater Glens Falls area. One is actually from the Hudson Valley area and is an uber qualified female who is qualified to actually be the plant manager, very interested in coming up when the time comes. So I wish I could award those jobs today. The first phase of the facility will require probably 12 or 13 people. But so we have applicants. If all goes well from this point forward, we hope to be operational by January of 2025. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have one more remote participant, and then I think we're going to wrap this up. We're a little bit over the time.
Okay,
Okay.
Lisa,
We'll do
I'm
two more.
going to be
Thank you.
sending you an unmute request. Lisa, I see your question in the chat.
Okay, I think we had one more in the back. Did you have a question? Come on up until we figure this out.
Seriously? You're serious? You really don't want to hear my comments today?
Oh, no, I will. I'm sorry. I apologize. No, I mean, do you have, it's additive from yesterday or repetitive?
Okay.
Okay, then you're up
I
next.
believe
Great,
she
thank
hasn't
you.
spoke yet either.
You have not spoken yet, so you have priority.
How are you? My name is Vicki Clark, and I live in the town of Moreau in South Glens Falls. And I have a question and I have a comment. What's the benefit to the town, and why should the residents support it?
Could you repeat that?
Yeah,
There's
there's a little background noise.
What is the benefit to the town, and why should the residents support this?
So I would refer to benefits of the town. It helps the town execute on the number one item in its comprehensive land use plan, which was adjudicated over, I believe, by Preston Jenkins and formalized in 2008, which is to develop the industrial park. That's number one. That brings economic development to the town. It brings expenditure of dollars on the construction of a facility, the operation of a facility, and so when those things happen, money flows into the economy. Secondly, it adds jobs. We know it's not a lot of jobs.
How many jobs? Yeah, how many?
I was about to tell you that.
Okay.
So over the course of the construction of all three phases, we would start phase one with 12 or 13 employees. By the construction of the third phase, we would have a total of about 25 employees. They're good paying jobs with health benefits for family and individual. And that, so I know it's not a high job count, but it is jobs, long-term jobs.
Well, you also have the jobs of the construction building the plant too, on
Right.
top of it.
Have you driven down Route 9 recently?
Yes, frequently.
Every business has a help wanted sign in the window. Every business.
Yeah.
There's plenty of jobs. The lack of jobs is not really an issue. There are jobs.
I see that, and I don't know why, then why am I receiving applicants? Why am I receiving inquiries from people that want jobs at Saratoga Biochar as opposed to a gas station or a fast food store or whatever?
Okay. So now I just wanted to make a comment. I just moved to this area about 18 months ago, and I met a lot of the people here, and I've met a lot of really good people. They're hardworking people. They go to work every day. They take care of their kids. They contribute to the community. They pay taxes, and life is really hard. Just struggling day to day to do that. And why do these people have to be afraid that they're going to get sick on top of everything else that they're dealing with? And I'm sure you're very fine people, and I don't think they're good and you're bad. I don't think that way. I think all people are good. But at the same time, we've seen over the years how these corporations move in and they pollute and they make people sick. And I know, and I think you know too, that in another decade or 2 decades or 3 decades, you guys and your shareholders are going to be getting wealthy, and our people are going to be getting sick. And I think that's just seems to be the cost of doing business. And someday, when we're old, and hopefully we'll live to be a ripe old age, and we're going to look back on our life, and we're going to think, did we do something to contribute, or did we do something to harm? And I know what I want to be thinking, and I'd ask you to think what you're going to be thinking.
My goal in this is to be a contributor, not harmful. We're not here to make anyone sick. That's not going to happen. Thank you for your input. I do hope our shareholders get rich, though. That's capitalism. That's part of our plan.
I think Ray is speaking for all of us up here. And we want to contribute, and we want to improve things. If you continue to hold us to what other people have done in the past, is that fair to us? We're trying to be the ones that come and clean things up. We're trying to change the status quo for the better. And I know that can be a little scary because it's new technology. Well, yeah, nobody's done it before, okay? But if we don't confront the issues in front of us, our survival's at stake as a species. And I'll leave you with that. That's what we're after. We're after trying to make a difference. We're after trying to protect human health, protect the environment, and trying to make a dent in climate change in the right direction. And I've had a career in renewable energy and agriculture, and I see things others don't. Like I said, I've worked in Ukraine. You go out in Ukrainian soils, and it's almost euphoric. It's the gases, everything it emits. It's alive. Our soils are dead here. And I mean, you judge a society by the health of its soils. We are failing. And this is a step in the right direction in agriculture. It's a step in the right direction in waste management. And the two of those coalescing, I mean, why not? If you can make a difference, you should make a difference. Right. We know we can make a difference here.
Thanks, Bryce.
Sharice?
Therese Gillis, Town of Fort Edward.
Therese,
I think
sorry.
you already know me, right? And it's with an E. And
We've
it's real.
met.
I feel we've met and we've said good night to each other. And what is encouraging, I'm finding, is the more that we do this, the more we can all get comfortable with each other and share our thoughts. There's also a lot of passionate people involved in this, yourself included, Bryce. You included, and sometimes that passion gets long-winded. I'm a Frenchman, so I understand that because I can talk a long time. I think that this woman who feels passionate for biochar needs to make her statement like maybe not quite that much, but It's okay. You guys probably had her come today because somebody
We did not.
commented
No, we
yesterday.
did not.
But it's okay. It's good
We
that
did
she's
not.
here. We're all
she came on her own, just
passionate
like
in
everybody here
causes.
has.
That's what brings us here. So that's good, you know? There are jobs in South Glens Falls, but that's all right. I got to find number one. My goodness. The longer it goes on, there's more. What I wanted to say at first was that a lot of us who participated in last night's meeting were up until wee hours of the morning. Jessica had a whole comment that she really didn't get to. The guy with his truck routes, or how many trucks, his truck study. He didn't sleep all night, you know, but maybe if he got you to consider that, this is all good information that we're doing. And if it runs over, it runs over.
Productive dialogue, I
Cannot
think I
say
referred to it as.
how many nights they ran over for GE and, you know, PCBs. So it's all good stuff. The main question that I had today that I didn't think of last night was the truckloads, I guess, was being referred to Long Island last night. I don't remember that. I think we were kind of calling it downstate because we're in Northeast New York. But they're not only coming up I-87, correct? I mean, the Casella guys like from over Rutland Way. So do you have truck maps as to where these trucks are coming through? If they're coming from Whitehall, or they're coming from Vermont, or they're coming from Hoosick Falls, is the truck route is going right down through the village of Hudson Falls, correct?
I would actually ask Patrick to address that if you wouldn't mind. We've had this discussion, and he seems to have a pretty good plan on how
So
to
I mean, instead of
regulate the
coming
traffic.
like 197 into Hudson Falls, 196, you can. And Patrick, it's really good you're here. It's nice, you know?
It's all good.
So, but like, I know we see the truck route coming from 87, but that's not the only place these trucks are coming in from, correct?
Casella manages biosolids throughout the Northeast, so it's accurate that it's all around. However, we have our own facility in Chateaugay, New York, so it's actually relatively unlikely that material from north of Moreau would end up coming back south.
Or north of Hudson Falls.
Sure, yeah. We do manage biosolids from a lot of different communities in Vermont. We've committed to Saratoga Biochar that the truck route that they've indicated is a truck route that we will use. That means that if we are coming from any point south, we're going to be on 87 and we'll follow the truck route, avoiding the school and things of that sort. There's a handful of generators, I would guess, in southern Vermont that, so we don't manage Brattleboro and we don't manage Bennington. So, and Vermont is a small state, so trying to think about some small generators, I guess it would really be Rutland. So today, Rutland goes up to our landfill on the Canadian border. If that were to come this way, it probably would come across Route 4 to Whitehall, and I think it's Fort Ann that we would cut across to 87 and take 87.
Oh, you're going to cut across to Fort, yeah. Well, that would be helpful if you demonstrated a map like that in the next times, because when you're trying to avoid communities, I mean, no. I'm really pretty loud, aren't I? But you can't hear me on the thing.
I can hear you, but they can't hear you at home.
And it's for the public record as well.
So, yeah, that's
recording.
okay. So I guess when I think of, I mean, you're not going to be sending biosludge from Whitehall to Chattagay, Whitehall, Fort Ann, or does it go there? Whitehall goes to Chattagay. That's amazing.
We don't manage Whitehall, but we manage Saratoga County, and it goes to Grasslands to Chattagay.
Okay. All right. So I guess just if you had a map that you could show, the residents on this side of the river, like that's why we're connected, because really it's just across the river from us. And perhaps a resident in the village of South Glens Falls is actually a little further away from the whole thing. So that's why we're all here, because it does affect us, and it is in our community. But thank you. That's all good stuff.
Thanks, Patrick. Thank you.
Thank you.
Another comment was made last night that if people didn't come to the meeting, that was showing their approval for biochar. And it was kind of strongly suggested. And I've never quite heard that no participation showed a yes vote. So my question is would it bear any weight to go back to old school and actually knock on doors and have some, petitions? Melanie and I were really successful at that in Fort Edward. Not that it turned out that we were successful in getting what we wanted, but it was successful in showing support for something that we were trying to obtain. So would that help if that happened, and would you recognize that on a petition? Or do you not think a petition carries any weight? That's just
A petition to support our project or against it?
a petition, sure. I can draw a line down the middle. I love knocking on doors. I'm old school. I love talking. I love getting that feel from the community. And I do think, as Tim Havens said last night, it's difficult to get people to come out. People don't come out. There's so many distractions. They'd rather stay home, play on their phone. It's really good they can connect to this. You got 42 people home listening to this meeting this afternoon. You had, how many, 100? I think I counted. You had a lot of people here last night, and I don't know how many you had
I
online.
think in the room, we calculated, I don't have the exact number, about 70 in the room.
Because I counted. I
Plus
think you
about,
were a little
plus
higher.
about 50 online.
Yeah,
At
so
the
you're
peak-
getting a
at the
good
peak.
turnout. You're getting a good feel from the community. You know, this is necessary.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess what I'm saying is, do you recognize, I don't want to do footwork, bring a petition that says, wow, I just got 90 signatures in 3 days who are against Saratoga Biochar coming to the area. Just because they don't want it. They can say that. You know what I mean? They can say, I'm not comfortable. We've experienced enough here. So do you recognize that, or you
I'm
wouldn't
not sure
recognize
exactly what you're asking. So by recognition, are you suggesting that if you generate a petition with whatever number of signatures that you're asking us, would we consider leaving?
No, not that, just that you would take that into consideration, that those people who stayed home were not in support of you.
Sure.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I mean, weather's getting nice. Do you know what I mean? Maybe the DEC would recognize that, because I do think, I found that to be true in Fort Edward.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody goes to a meeting in Fort Edward. Everybody, it's like, but if you knock on their door, everybody has an opinion. You know what I mean? And so maybe we could even line it up with, what is your opinion? You know what I mean? So it would give you a way, you know, one or the other. I noticed you didn't invite me to the table for a meeting with you, like 2 other guys, and that's fine. But I think this neighbor right here that is so close to your site, only because I was within 1,400 feet of the dredging project, and that he really should be included in all of these decisions that are being made. He's going to be impacted. We were impacted strongly. The thing went away, but this isn't going away. This is going to be in his yard. It's really difficult to live away from that, or next to that, not be able to go home at night. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Hope you have one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Yes.
Very brief last comment, question. Again, Cynthia Roberts in Hudson Falls, Kingsbury, which is about 4 miles from the river. And I would just say that the town itself is undergoing, the town of Hudson Falls, where we are right now, about 4 miles, I guess, from the site, is undergoing a comprehensive town plan development, which specifically identifies the rural character and all the resources of that environment as being like the town's greatest wealth and the goal for us to maintain. And it's certainly one of the reasons I moved here, you know. So I would say that it's a strong prerogative to protect those resources. And I want to just officially register my concern, you know, publicly about this project, not for your intentions, but because of the fact that it just seems very evident that the testing methods for these PFAS is just not even yet developed. Even if you have the technology that we hope and propose will, you know, eradicate these PFAS in your process, it just does not seem evident that the testing is there by New York State or is yet even required to test for these PFAS in your admissions. And that's my deepest concern, is that these are forever chemicals. And once they are in the land, in our water, in our bodies, you know, it's a permanent condition. So that's my deepest concern. And I think on a personal level, I would just be curious, would you be comfortable with this plant being in your backyard?
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes,
You wouldn't be concerned about the PFAS
I've
in
had
your plants?
countless people say, well, why don't you build in your backyard? Well, there's no industrial park that's zoned for it in my backyard. I'm sorry, there just isn't.
I've been in the biosolids.
It's really hard to find one. There aren't many left.
I believe it is, yeah.
I've been in the biosolids my whole career, and part of it is you have to travel. It's not in our backyard. I would gladly love to have this in Missouri, so I don't have to drive up here or fly up here every week. Honestly, we would, but we don't have 75,000 tons a day in Lake of the Ozarks, or a year. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if I may on the testing,
Yes, please.
There are established EPA-approved test methods for solids, which would be the testing of biosolids.
Right.
And for Saratoga Biochar, when they make their product, they've tested the batch scales, but if they're trying to demonstrate that their biochar that they produce doesn't have PFAS, they can confirm it, but I would assume they're going to test the biochar that they produce for PFAS to demonstrate that it doesn't have PFAS in it.
Yep.
That test method is established, that's EPA approved. For water, test methods are EPA approved. The one that's not EPA, and I'll say not EPA approved, is for air.
Right.
It is an established test method. You can look it up. It's under the other test method section of the test methods. So it's not the certified test methods, it's
Right.
the other test methods. But it's in a status of the data generated from those test methods is usable. It's just not to the stage of being in the codified regulations of this is the established test method for air. So there is a test method for air, and it is, the labs are doing it. The labs are, integral in developing it. And as I mentioned earlier, it tests for currently 50 PFAS compounds, but that's the status of testing right now.
Right.
And I'd like to reiterate, we're going to be the first biosolid solution that is actually tested for PFAS.
Right, which is
Both in the
great.
atmosphere,
Yeah, but
and the product itself.
yeah, and I think it's
So-
really the emissions as a citizen who lives 4 miles from here. And I think you mentioned you're in Kansas City and you're in the Midwest, but you're local. I mean, just really deeply considering that there are many people. I know I have a bunch of friends who are working. They've got kids. They can't be here in person, but we're worried about the kids. We're worried about our soil. We're worried about, these contaminants being emitted on an ongoing basis for 30 years with,
And we're concerned as well. I mean, that's part of what motivates us to risk our careers and take a different, the insanity of what we're doing is there. We're sticking our necks out to do this. And it's because we know, not believe, but we know what we're doing remediates the material. It gets it out of the system. We're the only endpoint, commercial endpoint for sure, of any PFAS right now. I mean, that's what we're trying to build here. We're trying to get a solution to the problem.
Right.
And as far as affecting the rural character,
It's the soil, the actual resource of the soil.
Well, and that's exactly what I was going to point out. The soil needs to be restored. You have issues with soil degradation here in New York. Finger Lakes area, for instance, has a lot of algae pollution from agriculture that this can help correct. We can start correcting these problems and getting out of the lake streams. If you've ever played golf, every golf course has the same problem. You get algae all over the ponds. They have to aerate and make sure the water's constantly moving just to avoid it so it doesn't look bad. But we're trying to fix these problems in a meaningful way that isn't just throwing more chemicals on it.
Yes.
I mean, there are solutions. You can just throw chemicals on the algae and it'll kill it. But that's not necessarily good either.
Right.
What we're trying to do is fix the problem upstream at the source.
Good.
And that's really what we're all about.
I think for someone who doesn't have a voice, I don't live in terms of living in the town of Moreau because I don't live there. The planning board is not my planning board. I can go to my planning board and voice my concerns and have it, as a resident be registered. It's very, very important to me as an adjacent resident to have that data, those emissions control be incredibly strict, and I'm just registering my concern again, even though it's an alternate form of testing, that there are so many PFAS that are not yet registered, and
let me put this
want to
out
make
there.
sure that it's
if we were a
registered.
GE, why would we be so transparent, put everything on our website? We have nothing to hide. I just want to state that.
But you don't get the point. When GE came, so wasn't GE. They didn't know that PCBs were an issue when they put them in the capacitors as an insulator. They actually did. They were testing, they knew they were dangerous. Just all I'm saying.
Tracy, I'd like to hear your opinions on this.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, we've lived through it and we saw people say that stuff wasn't harmful. They used it to keep down the oil on their roads, for God's sake.
Oil companies are known
They
about.
honestly felt
Yeah.
that it was okay stuff. That's what I'm saying.
Teresa, I don't want to interrupt you, but I just want you to know that if you're not speaking in a microphone, your statement's not getting captured for DEC to hear. And I think you want them to hear you, that's all.
But we're not a large corporation. We're risking our careers, we're risking our livelihoods on this. That's very different from a corporation. I hope you appreciate that. But not only have we looked at the current regulations, we're trying to build something that's future-proof, that looking down the roads, because this asset will be here for 30 years. We don't want to be challenged when regulations change. We want to be ahead of the curve. That's why we take every precaution we can that we know of today. And we will also keep an eye out for everything in the future. Trust me, I want to be at the cutting edge of this stuff. That's how we stay ahead as a company. But we've got to start somewhere. And we've got to get this out there so that others can see it as well. Because this solution needs to be proliferated throughout the country and throughout the world. And I know nobody wants to be a guinea pig, and we're not suggesting being a guinea pig. We've come to this situation with guarantees from manufacturers.
I'm so
science
sorry,
is behind
but I
us.
just have to say this, okay? We understand there's a problem to be solved.
State your name again, just for the record.
Really,
please.
like somebody doesn't recognize my voice? I'm Therese Gillis.
Thank you.
Thanks. And I'm from Fort Edward. I was born here. I am still here. And I really think you will be long gone in 30 years. So I hopefully, probably not, I'll be about 97, but my grandchildren just live 2 blocks from here. That's our concern. And your kids aren't here. She has kids that are here. She has friends who have kids who are here. That's the problem. And we've already withstood enough in this region. So I understand that it has to go somewhere. I think it's a wonderful concept. If you guys can make this work, hats off, because we need it. We just don't need it here. We're inundated. That's the problem. All the factories that were here along the Hudson, they were jobs. Looks like that poor woman needs jobs for her kid in South Glens Falls. But they all left. Hercules is gone. Cement Works just got shut down. They're all gone. My husband worked in every mill that got shut down. That's why there's the pollution here. They were jobs. We're done. That's what we're all saying. We can't bear the weight of one more issue. So for you guys to talk about bringing biosludge from anywhere that's not our own biosludge that we could possibly come up with a theory to treat is very scary. We don't need other people's sludge coming to our community, affecting our grandchildren and our children. Was that good? I didn't even have to have that written down. I have fought for this community for 35 years. And I have scanned all those people who got sick, who you don't maybe think those people really got sick, but the people here did, and that's what they're afraid of. I'm saying you need to take it someplace else. We're done. Sorry, I know you have a good, I don't know that. You've tested 2 truckloads, or 8 trucks.
4 semis.
Thanks. You've tested 4 truckloads, and you're talking about bringing in 50 truckloads a day to our community. Whatever happens is going to happen to our community. Set up a little smaller place. Do it in somebody's backyard. Just not ours. When it's proven, come on back. Everybody needs it. Of course we could use 20 jobs. I rest my case. I'm so sorry. And I know you're trying to make your point. You could run for president. You're really good. You really try to make your point, okay? But it really is tough to sit here and keep listening to the same thing.
Let me alleviate your fear a little bit. Patrick, where's the biosolids from Glens Falls currently go today?
Hudson Falls.
Hudson Falls.
No, I think it goes. It's okay.
No, it goes
no,
to Hudson Falls.
And really, we can shut it down. Don't you think? I mean, we'll get together again. We'll meet again. You know.
No, please answer. I would like to know where that goes to.
You need to know something about the current situation.
Goes to the incinerator, right?
Glens Falls wastewater treatment plant had a sewage sludge incinerator that they closed down in 2016. They didn't want to spend the money. on the new air emissions equipment that would be required. So since then, Glens Falls has directed all of their municipal biosolids to the Hudson Falls trash incinerator.
Thank you.
So
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you, Patrick. So
Did
the
not know that.
biosolids today is being incinerated. Now, compared to an incinerator, we don't emit nearly what they do into the environment. So, and that incinerator won't be around much longer because it has the same fate as the Glens Falls incinerator. So, quite frankly, we're proposing a solution that will take that incinerator offline.
But you're not proposing to just take care of our biosolids. Get it? That's the point. You're not.
We hear you.
Yeah.
I hear you.
I understand.
I do hear you.
I hear you.
Biosolids to me are biosolids.
Thank you all for participating. I appreciate your time and spending so much time here with us today and for your questions and comments. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry to come late. Can I ask you a question? I guess it hasn't been asked.
Well, honestly, this meeting was supposed to end over a half an hour ago.
Okay, maybe in another meeting you can address some carbon neutral things. Thank you.
You can go
Oh,
ahead.
dear. All right, now you got Bryce's attention. Okay, everybody sit down. It'll be another hour.
You hit my sweet spot.
Go ahead, ask a question. The mics are still on.
I was just,
Speak into the mic.
okay, is that better?
If you could just give us your name and where you live and then your question, please.
Brenda Collins, I'm up off Martindale here in Hudson Falls.
Thank you.
Okay.
You're welcome. And I was wondering, as we move forward into green kind of things, if you're working with some carbon neutral, and if not, are you looking at offsets? And do you have some kind of projected measurements for the compounds that will be released, and both volume and percentage annually?
Yes, we have done a life cycle greenhouse gas analysis of our facility conducted by eco-engineers. They work in all the compliance markets like California, Canada, et cetera. We look at it from the perspective of we're offsetting biosolids disposal solutions on average in New York. We're also substituting for chemical fertilizer, so avoided emissions are part of it. And we also looked at the sequestration benefit of when we do the pyrolysis process on this material, it fixes that carbon to a point where it does not degrade for like 1,000 years. So when applied to soil, it sequesters carbon in the soil. So those three offsets are 237% relative to our actual emissions. So our net emission and net offset is 137%, meaning we're more than offsetting twice as what we're polluting. So in short, this isn't carbon neutral. This is carbon negative. This moves the needle in the other direction.
Okay, has the life cycle analysis included the diesel fumes from the trucks?
Yes, it included transportation. It included the chemical uses in our facility. It included natural gas usage. It also included electricity usage.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And our actual carbon emissions, CO2 emissions at our SAC. Sorry, forgot about that.
I got hit the mic.